Freyja's divine heritage traces back to the enigmatic Vanir, a group of fertility and prosperity deities whose origins predate the more widely known Aesir pantheon. Her father Njordr commanded dominion over the seas, winds and coastal regions, wielding authority over maritime trade routes and fishing grounds that sustained Norse communities. This paternal connection established Freyja's fundamental association with abundance and wealth, characteristics that would define her worship throughout Scandinavia. The identity of Freyja's mother remains one of Norse mythology's most persistent mysteries. Unlike her father Njordr, whose mythological presence appears consistently across sources, no definitive maternal figure emerges from the surviving texts. Some scholars propose that her mother was Njordr's unnamed sister, a theory supported by Snorri Sturluson's cryptic references in the prose Edda to marriages between Vanir siblings being acceptable within their divine society. This practice, while taboo among the Aesir, reflected the Vanir's distinct cultural values and their emphasis on fertility cycles that governed agricultural prosperity. Freyja's sibling relationship with Freyja, the male fertility god, created a powerful divine partnership that embodied complementary aspects of natural abundance. While modern interpretations sometimes describe them as twins, the source material presents them simply as brother and sister without specifying simultaneous birth. Freyja governed agricultural fertility, ensuring bountiful harvests and livestock reproduction, while Freyja's domain encompassed human fertility, love, and the mystical arts. Their combined influence extended across all aspects of life that required divine intervention for prosperity and continuation. The Vanir's integration into Norse religious consciousness occurred through the Aesir-Vanir War, a conflict that fundamentally reshaped the pantheon structure. This war began when the Aesir, led by Odin, attempted to eliminate Gullveig, a mysterious figure associated with gold and sorcery, who many scholars identify with Freyja herself. The Vanir's retaliation demonstrated their formidable power, forcing the Aesir to recognise them as equals rather than subordinates. The subsequent peace treaty established a hostage exchange that brought Freyja and Njordr to Asgard as permanent residents among the Aesir. This arrangement represented more than diplomatic necessity. It created a theological synthesis that incorporated Vanir fertility concepts into the Aesir's warrior-focused worldview. Freyja's presence in Asgard introduced practices and knowledge that the Aesir lacked, particularly the mystical art of Seidr, a form of magic involving prophecy, shape-shifting, and manipulation of fate. Archaeological evidence from various Scandinavian sites reveals that Freyja's worship incorporated elements from earlier Germanic fertility goddesses, suggesting a continuous religious tradition that adapted to changing cultural contexts. Bronze Age rock carvings from Sweden and Denmark depict female figures with pronounced sexual characteristics, often accompanied by symbols of abundance such as grain sheaves or pregnant animals. These representations share iconographic elements with later depictions of Freyja, indicating that her worship evolved from prehistoric fertility cults. The linguistic evolution of Freyja's name provides crucial insights into her historical development. The Old Norse Freyja derives from the Proto-Germanic Fraujon, meaning lady or mistress. This title indicated high social status and authority, distinguishing her from ordinary women and emphasizing her divine sovereignty. The masculine equivalent Freyr shares this etymological root, reinforcing their parallel positions within the Vanir hierarchy. Freyja's numerous epithets reflect different aspects of her divine personality and regional variations in her worship. The name Gefn, appearing in Snorri's prose Edda, connects to the Old Norse verb gefa, meaning to give. This epithet emphasizes her role as a generous bestower of gifts, particularly those related to fertility, prosperity, and magical knowledge. Archaeological discoveries of votive offerings at sites associated with Freyja worship support this interpretation, showing that devotees expected divine reciprocity for their sacrifices. The epithet horn presents etymological complexities that have sparked scholarly debate. Some linguists connect it to horn, referencing either drinking horns used in ritual contexts or animal horns symbolizing fertility and abundance. Alternative interpretations link horn to concepts of flax or linen, materials essential for textile production and trade. This connection would align with Freyja's association with domestic prosperity and women's economic activities within Norse society. Mardel, another of Freyja's epithets, demonstrates her connection to maritime activities and coastal communities. The name combines Mar with Dol, creating an image of radiant beauty emerging from oceanic depths. This epithet reflects her father Njord's maritime domain while establishing her independent authority over sea-related fertility, including the abundance of fish and favourable conditions for coastal settlements. The epithet Sir, meaning sow, directly references female swine and their remarkable reproductive capacity. Pigs held special significance in Norse culture as symbols of fertility and wealth, with archaeological evidence showing that pig remains frequently appear in ritual deposits at religious sites. Freyja's association with swine extended beyond mere symbolism. Her sacred boar Hildisvini served as her mountain companion, demonstrating the practical integration of fertility symbolism into her mythological narratives. Regional variations in Freyja's worship reveal how different communities adapted her cult to local needs and traditions. Coastal settlements emphasized her maritime aspects, conducting rituals to ensure successful fishing seasons and safe sea voyages. Agricultural communities focused on her fertility functions, timing ceremonies to coincide with planting and harvest cycles. Urban trading centers highlighted her association with wealth and prosperity, seeking her blessing for commercial ventures and market activities. The integration of Freyja into Aesir society required careful negotiation of theological differences between the two divine groups. The Aesir's emphasis on warfare, honour, and hierarchical authority contrasted sharply with the Vanir's focus on fertility, prosperity, and cyclical renewal. Freyja's presence in Asgard created opportunities for cultural exchange while maintaining her distinct identity and practices. Her introduction of Seidr magic to the Aesir represented a significant theological innovation. This practice involved trance states, spirit communication, and manipulation of fate threads, techniques that complemented but differed from the Aesir's more direct approaches to divine intervention. Odin's eagerness to learn Seidr from Freyja demonstrates the practical value of Vanir magical knowledge, even as it challenged traditional Aesir gender roles and social expectations. The archaeological record provides substantial evidence for Freyja's widespread worship across Scandinavia and Germanic territories. Gold bracteates from the migration period frequently depict female figures with attributes matching later descriptions of Freyja, including elaborate jewellery, association with boars, and symbols of fertility. These artifacts suggest that her worship maintained consistent iconographic elements across several centuries of cultural change. Linguistic evidence from place names throughout Scandinavia reveals the geographical extent of Freyja's cult. Norwegian locations such as Frøyland and Swedish sites like Frölunda preserve her name in forms that indicate active worship communities. These toponymic survivals often correlate with archaeological discoveries of ritual objects and votive deposits, providing concrete evidence for the practical implementation of her worship. The continuity between prehistoric fertility cults and Freyja's historical worship appears particularly strong in Denmark, where Bronze Age religious sites show evidence of continuous use through the Viking Age. Ritual deposits at these locations contain objects associated with fertility, prosperity, and feminine divine power, creating an unbroken chain of religious practice spanning over a millennium. Germanic tribes beyond Scandinavia preserved related traditions that illuminate Freyja's broader cultural significance. The Suebi, described by Tacitus in his Germania, worshipped a goddess called Nertus, who shared characteristics with both Njord and Freyja. This connection suggests that Vanir deities represented widespread Germanic religious concepts, rather than purely Scandinavian innovations. Freyja's divine lineage established her unique position within the Norse pantheon as both an outsider and an integral member of Asgard's divine community. Her Vanir heritage provided legitimacy for practices and beliefs that differed from Aesir traditions, while her integration into their society demonstrated the flexibility and adaptability of Norse religious thought. This complex identity would shape her mythological adventures and her relationships with both divine and mortal beings throughout the rich tapestry of Norse legendary literature. Freyja's multifaceted divine authority encompassed realms that modern observers might consider contradictory, yet within Norse cosmology these domains formed a coherent whole reflecting the complex realities of existence. Her governance over fertility extended far beyond simple reproductive functions, encompassing the intricate cycles that sustained both natural abundance and human prosperity. Archaeological excavations at Gamla, Uppsala in Sweden have revealed ritual deposits containing miniature ploughs, grain samples and fertility amulets buried in layers dating from the 6th to 11th centuries, demonstrating the practical applications of her agricultural dominion. The goddess's influence over crop fertility manifested through specific seasonal rituals that aligned human agricultural activities with divine will. Farmers across Scandinavia timed their spring planting ceremonies to coincide with astronomical events associated with Freyja's celestial movements, particularly the appearance of Venus as the morning star. These rituals involved the burial of bread offerings in newly ploughed fields, accompanied by invocations requesting her blessing for abundant harvests. The bread itself carried symbolic significance, representing the transformation of grain through human labour into sustenance, a process that required divine intervention to ensure success. Livestock fertility formed another crucial aspect of Freyja's agricultural domain. Cattle, sheep, and pigs represented substantial investments for Norse farmers, and their reproductive success determined family survival and economic prosperity. Spring breeding ceremonies invoked Freyja's power to ensure healthy offspring and abundant milk production. Archaeological evidence from farmsteads in Iceland and Norway shows that animal bones found in ritual contexts often display cut marks suggesting ceremonial butchering, with choice portions likely offered to secure divine favour for the remaining herd's fertility. Human reproduction fell squarely within Freyja's sphere of influence, though her role extended beyond mere conception to encompass the entire spectrum of sexual relationships and their social implications. Marriage negotiations frequently included appeals to Freyja for compatibility between prospective spouses and the promise of numerous healthy children. Wedding ceremonies incorporated specific rituals designed to invoke her blessing, including the exchange of fertility symbols such as carved wooden phalluses or amber beads shaped like vulvas. The goddess's association with sexual desire transcended the boundaries of marital relationships, encompassing the full range of human erotic experience. Unlike Christian moral frameworks that would later dominate European thought, Norse society recognized sexual pleasure as a divine gift worthy of celebration rather than shame. Freyja's worship included rituals that acknowledged and sanctified sexual desire, treating it as a natural force that required proper channeling rather than suppression. Her connection to prostitution, while controversial in later Christian interpretations, reflected practical realities of Norse society, where sexual services formed part of the economic landscape. Sacred prostitution associated with Freyja's temples provided both spiritual and material benefits, with participants viewing their activities as religious devotion rather than mere commercial transaction. Archaeological discoveries of distinctive jewellery and clothing fragments at suspected temple sites suggest that these practitioners held recognised social positions within their communities. The goddess's dominion over war and death presents a striking counterpoint to her fertility associations. Yet this combination reflected Norse understanding of life's fundamental interconnectedness. Battle represented the ultimate test of masculine virtue, and death in combat provided the most honourable conclusion to a warrior's existence. Freyja's right to claim half of the battle slain established her as Odin's equal in determining the fate of fallen heroes, a prerogative that emphasised her authority over life's most crucial transitions. Her Hrungnir, described in the Prose Edda as having a roof supported by silver and gold pillars, served as the destination for her chosen dead. Unlike Valhalla's emphasis on eternal warfare preparation, Hrungnir provided a realm focused on pleasure, abundance, and peaceful afterlife enjoyment. Warriors who entered Freyja's hall could expect feasting, sexual fulfillment, and freedom from the constant battle training that characterised Odin's Einherjar. This alternative vision of the afterlife appealed particularly to those who valued life's pleasures alongside martial honour. The selection process for determining which fallen warriors went to Freyja versus Odin involved complex considerations beyond simple combat prowess. Some sources suggest that warriors who died protecting their families or communities, rather than seeking personal glory, were more likely to join Freyja's retinue. Others indicate that the goddess preferred those who had shown particular devotion to fertility deities during their lifetimes, creating a theological framework that rewarded balanced spiritual practice. Battlefield appearances by Freyja herself, while less frequently documented than Odin's interventions, nonetheless played crucial roles in determining combat outcomes. The Volsunga saga describes her arriving at battlefields, wearing a falcon feather cloak that allowed rapid flight between earth and sky, her golden jewellery gleaming as she surveyed the carnage below. Her presence reportedly inspired both terror and desire among combatants, with some warriors fighting more fiercely in hopes of attracting her attention, while others became distracted by her overwhelming beauty. The practice of Seidr magic represented perhaps Freyja's most distinctive contribution to Aesir divine capabilities. This shamanic tradition involved techniques that differed fundamentally from the runic magic and direct divine intervention typically employed by Odin and other Aesir deities. Seidr practitioners entered trance states that allowed communication with spirits, manipulation of fate threads, and prophecy regarding future events. The practice required specialized knowledge of herbs, ritual implements, and incantations that Freyja had mastered during her time among the Vanir. Her instruction of Odin in Seidr techniques created theological complications within Aesir society, as the practice was traditionally associated with feminine spiritual authority. Norse gender roles typically assigned active, aggressive magic to men while reserving receptive, intuitive practices for women. Seidr's emphasis on trance states, spirit possession, and passive reception of divine knowledge challenged these conventional boundaries, requiring Odin to adopt what his society considered feminine spiritual postures. The physical implements of Seidr practice included distinctive staffs topped with metal ornaments, often featuring intricate animal designs that served as spiritual focuses. Archaeological discoveries of such staffs in women's graves across Scandinavia, particularly those accompanied by unusual collections of herbs, crystals, and foreign objects, suggest that Seidr practitioners held recognized positions within their communities. The graves often show evidence of deliberate ritual treatment, with the deceased positioned in ways that differed from standard burial practices. Prophetic Seidr sessions involved elaborate preparations including fasting, ritual purification, and the construction of temporary sacred spaces using portable altars and textile hangings. Practitioners wore distinctive clothing that marked their spiritual status, including cloaks decorated with metal ornaments that created sound during ritual movements. The sessions themselves could last for hours, with the practitioner entering progressively deeper trance states, while assistants maintained protective circles and interpreted the resulting visions. Freyja's mastery of shapeshifting through Seidr allowed her to assume various animal forms, each providing specific capabilities suited to different magical purposes. Her Falcon form enabled rapid travel across the 9 worlds, while her Sow manifestation connected her to Earth-based fertility magic. These transformations required not merely magical power, but deep understanding of each animal's essential nature, suggesting that her shape-shifting abilities developed through extensive study of natural phenomena rather than simple divine privilege. The goddess's association with gold and material wealth manifested through multiple interconnected symbols and practices that reinforced her status as a provider of prosperity. Her famous golden tears, shed whenever she mourned her missing husband Odin, transformed into precious metal upon touching the earth. This imagery connected emotional pain to material abundance, suggesting that suffering could generate wealth through divine alchemy. The tears also symbolized the transformative power of feminine emotion, challenging Norse cultural assumptions about the relationship between feeling and material success. Her ownership of the magnificent golden necklace Brisingamen demonstrated both her wealth and her willingness to sacrifice for desired objects. The necklace's creation by 4 dwarven craftsmen required us to spend 1 night with each artisan, a transaction that scandalized some later Christian interpreters but reflected Norse pragmatic attitudes towards sexual exchange. The finished piece reportedly enhanced her already considerable beauty while serving as a symbol of divine authority that other deities recognized and respected. Gold's symbolic significance in Freyja's worship extended beyond mere material value to encompass concepts of purity, permanence, and divine essence. Ritual offerings to the goddess frequently included gold objects ranging from simple rings to elaborate armbands decorated with intricate animal motifs. These offerings were often deposited in water sources, buried in sacred groves, or placed in specially constructed shrine buildings where they remained untouched by human hands. The economic implications of Freyja's wealth associations had practical consequences for her worshippers, who expected divine assistance in commercial ventures, trade negotiations, and resource acquisition. Merchants travelling dangerous routes carried amulets bearing her symbols, believing that her protection would ensure both physical safety and profitable outcomes. Archaeological evidence from trading centres shows concentrations of Freyja-related artefacts, suggesting that commercial communities particularly valued her patronage. Her connection to amber, the gold of the north, reflected both geological realities and mythological symbolism. Baltic amber deposits provided Scandinavian communities with valuable trade goods that could be exchanged for foreign luxuries and essential resources. Freyja's association with this fossilized resin connected her to ancient life forces, preserved in golden transparency, creating theological links between past abundance and present prosperity. The goddess's influence over textile production and the wealth it generated established her authority over women's economic activities within Norse society. Spinning, weaving, and fabric decoration required significant skill and time investment, producing goods that served both practical and ceremonial purposes. High-quality textiles functioned as status symbols, trade commodities, and diplomatic gifts, making textile production a crucial component of family and community wealth generation. Freyja's patronage of skilled craftswomen extended to metalworking, jewelry creation, and decorative arts that enhanced both personal beauty and social status. Archaeological discoveries of women's graves containing specialized tools for fine metalwork, often accompanied by unfinished jewelry pieces, suggest that female artisans operated under divine patronage that legitimized their economic independence. These craftswomen likely enjoyed higher social status than typical housewives, with their skills providing both personal income and community recognition. The integration of Freyja's various domains created a theological framework that acknowledged life's fundamental interconnectedness, while providing practical guidance for navigating its complexities. Her authority over fertility, death, magic, and wealth reflected Norse understanding that existence required constant negotiation between opposing forces, with divine intervention necessary to maintain beneficial balance. This comprehensive approach to divine authority would prove essential as her mythological adventures tested the limits of both her power and her wisdom. The magnificent golden necklace known as Brisingamen stands as perhaps the most celebrated artifact in Norse mythology, its acquisition marking one of the most controversial yet defining moments in Freyja's divine career. The necklace's creation began in the subterranean workshops of Alfheim, where 4 master dwarven craftsmen, Alfrig, Berling, Dvalin, and Grer, laboured with techniques that surpassed even the legendary skills of their kinsmen. These artisans possessed knowledge of metallurgical secrets that allowed them to work with gold in ways that produced not merely jewellery, but objects imbued with supernatural properties that could enhance the wearer's inherent divine attributes. The workshop where Brisingamen took shape lay deep within a mountain hollow, accessible only through narrow passages that wound through living rock. Archaeological parallels to such workshops have been discovered in Sweden's Bergslagen region, where ancient mining operations reveal sophisticated smelting techniques dating to the migration period. The dwarven craftsmen worked by the light of forge fires that burned with unnatural intensity, the flames fed by charcoal produced from trees that grew in the twilight realms between worlds. The gold itself came from deposits that formed where Freyja's tears had fallen during her searches for her missing husband Oda, creating a material connection between the goddess's emotional suffering and the necklace's ultimate power. Each dwarf contributed specialised skills to the necklace's construction. Alfrig mastered the art of gold purification, removing all impurities through processes that involved both physical techniques and magical incantations. His methods produced gold of such clarity that it seemed to contain captured sunlight, glowing with internal radiance that required no external illumination. Berling excelled in the creation of intricate chain links, each one formed through hammerwork so precise that the finished product possessed flexibility rivaling that of silk fabric, while maintaining the strength of forged steel. Dvalin's expertise lay in the application of runic inscriptions that enhanced the necklace's magical properties. Using tools made from meteoric iron and techniques passed down through generations of dwarven lawmasters, he carved symbols so small they remained invisible to ordinary sight, yet powerful enough to influence fate itself. These runes created connections between the necklace and the cosmic forces that governed fertility, beauty, and divine authority, ensuring that Brisingamen would amplify rather than merely complement its wearer's natural abilities. Grer's contribution involved the final assembly and the integration of gemstones that had been harvested from the roots of Yggdrasil itself. These stones, formed from crystallized sap of the world tree, contained essence from all 9 realms, creating a cosmological map in miniature that granted the wearer enhanced perception of interdimensional connections. The setting of these stones required techniques that balanced their individual properties while creating harmonic resonances that enhanced the overall effect. When Freyja discovered the 4 craftsmen working on their masterpiece, she immediately recognized both its extraordinary beauty and its potential to enhance her divine authority. The necklace's appearance defied conventional description, as its golden chains seemed to flow like liquid metal while maintaining solid form, and its embedded gems shifted colour in response to the viewer's emotional state. The craftsmanship exceeded anything previously created by either dwarven or divine artisans, representing a pinnacle of artistic achievement that combined technical mastery with magical innovation. The negotiation for Brisingamen's acquisition revealed the complex relationship between divine authority and personal desire within Norse cosmology. The 4 dwarves, despite their reverence for divine beings, refused conventional payment in gold, silver, or magical favours. Instead, they demanded that Freyja spend 1 night with each of them, a request that tested her commitment to obtaining the necklace against social conventions regarding divine dignity and sexual autonomy. This demand reflected dwarven, understanding that their creation possessed value beyond material wealth, requiring payment in experiences that could not be duplicated or substituted. Freyja's acceptance of these terms demonstrated her pragmatic approach to achieving desired goals, prioritizing the necklace's acquisition over concerns about potential criticism from other deities. Her decision reflected Vanir values that emphasized practical outcomes over abstract moral principles, contrasting with Aesir tendencies to prioritize honor and reputation above material considerations. The 4 nights she spent in the dwarven workshop involved not merely physical intimacy, but also exchanges of knowledge, magical techniques, and cultural perspectives that enriched both parties' understanding of cosmic relationships. The completed Brisingamen transformed Freyja's appearance in ways that enhanced her natural beauty while adding supernatural qualities that affected all who encountered her. The necklace's weight distributed perfectly across her neck and shoulders, its chains conforming to her movements with fluid grace that made it appear to be part of her physical form rather than an external ornament. The embedded gems caught and reflected light in patterns that created subtle hypnotic effects, drawing observers' attention while preventing them from looking away comfortably. More significantly, Brisingamen amplified Freyja's existing divine powers, particularly those related to fertility magic and emotional influence. Warriors who glimpsed the necklace during battle found their courage either dramatically increased or completely shattered, depending on whether they fought for causes that aligned with her values. Women seeking her blessing for childbirth or romantic success reported that the necklace's presence in their dreams indicated favourable divine attention, while those who had offended her experienced nightmares featuring its burning golden light. The necklace's theft by Loki, motivated by his complex relationship with both Freyja and the concept of divine property, created one of the most significant crises in Asgard's political structure. Loki's shape-shifting abilities allowed him to infiltrate Freyja's private chambers while she slept, transforming into a flea to avoid detection by her supernatural senses. The theft required extraordinary stealth, as Brisingamen's magical properties created protective fields around its resting place that would have alerted Freyja to any conventional intrusion attempt. The recovery of Brisingamen involved complex negotiations between Odin, Freyja and Heimdall, the watchman of the gods whose extraordinary sensory abilities allowed him to track the necklace's location despite Loki's concealment efforts. Heimdall's pursuit of Loki took him across multiple realms, their conflict ultimately requiring direct combat in seal form along the shores of Singastein. This battle demonstrated that even seemingly minor thefts could escalate into conflicts that threatened cosmic stability, particularly when they involved artifacts of Brisingamen's significance. The Falcon cloak known as Valshammer represented another of Freyja's most powerful possessions, though its origins differed significantly from the dwarven craftsmanship that created Brisingamen. This magical garment consisted of feathers harvested from falcons that nested in the highest branches of Yggdrasil, where they fed on fruits that contained essence from all 9 realms. The feathers possessed inherent magical properties that allowed rapid transformation between human and avian forms, though their use required specific knowledge of shape-shifting techniques that Freyja had mastered through her Seidr training. The cloak's construction involved weaving techniques that combined physical craftsmanship with magical processes that bound the feathers into a coherent garment while preserving their individual transformative properties. Each feather retained connection to its original falcon, creating a collective consciousness that provided the wearer with enhanced flight instincts and predatory awareness. The finished cloak appeared as a shimmering brown garment that seemed to move independently of wind currents, its surface rippling with patterns that suggested constant motion even when completely still. Freyja's use of the Falcon cloak enabled rapid travel across vast distances, transforming her from divine woman to bird of prey in moments that involved complete physical restructuring rather than mere illusion. The transformation process required mental preparation that aligned her consciousness with Falcon instincts while maintaining enough human awareness to control the flight's direction and purpose. This dual consciousness created unique perspectives that enhanced her understanding of both terrestrial and aerial environments, contributing to her reputation for comprehensive knowledge of all realms. The Cloak's lending to other deities, particularly Loki during his various missions requiring rapid travel or stealth infiltration, demonstrated Freyja's willingness to share powerful artifacts when circumstances demanded cooperative action. Loki's use of Valshammer during his journey to Jotunheim to recover Thor's stolen hammer Mjolnir showed how the Cloak's properties adapted to different users while maintaining its essential characteristics. However, the Cloak's effectiveness depended partly on the user's existing magical knowledge, with inexperienced shapeshifters risking loss of human consciousness during extended transformations. The Falcon form provided advantages beyond simple transportation, including enhanced sensory capabilities that allowed reconnaissance activities impossible in human form. Falcon vision could detect movement across enormous distances, while distinguishing details that escaped normal observation, making the Cloak invaluable for gathering intelligence about potential threats or opportunities. The predatory instincts that accompanied the transformation also provided combat advantages, as Falcon reflexes and spatial awareness translated into improved fighting abilities even after returning to human form. Sessrumnir, Freyja's magnificent hall within Folkvanga, represented architectural achievement that rivaled even Odin's famous Valhalla, while providing a distinctly different vision of divine hospitality and afterlife rewards. The hall's name, meaning seat roomy or having many seats, indicated its capacity to accommodate the substantial number of battle dead that Freyja claimed as her portion, according to the ancient agreements governing warrior afterlife distribution. Archaeological evidence from high-status halls in Denmark and Sweden provides insights into the probable appearance of such structures, with their massive timber frameworks, elaborate decorative carvings and sophisticated heating systems. The hall's construction utilised materials that demonstrated both wealth and magical properties, with its pillars crafted from silver and gold that had been alchemically treated to provide structural strength exceeding that of conventional metals. The roof consisted of overlapping shields taken from legendary warriors whose deeds had earned them permanent commemoration, creating a ceiling that told visual stories of heroic achievement while providing practical protection from the elements. These shields retained magical properties from their original owners, creating an atmosphere charged with warrior essence that inspired both reverence and martial enthusiasm among the hall's inhabitants. Interior furnishings reflected Freyja's emphasis on comfort and pleasure, rather than the martial focus that characterized Valhalla's appointments. Long tables crafted from woods that grew only in divine realms supported feast settings that included drinking horns carved from the tusks of supernatural boars, plates made from polished amber that glowed with internal light, and serving vessels that refilled themselves automatically with mead brewed from honey produced by bees that fed on Yggdrasil's flowers. The seating consisted of chairs and benches upholstered with furs from animals that existed only in the most remote wilderness areas, providing both comfort and connection to natural forces. The selection process for warriors destined for Sessrumnir operated according to criteria that differed from those governing admission to Valhalla, reflecting Freyja's distinct values and priorities regarding heroic achievement. While Odin's Einherjar consisted primarily of warriors who had died, seeking personal glory or following their lord's commands, Freyja's chosen dead included those who had fallen protecting their families, defending their communities, or fighting for causes that aligned with fertility and prosperity rather than conquest and domination. This selection process created a warrior culture within Sessrumnir that emphasized collective welfare over individual achievement. The daily activities within Sessrumnir provided alternatives to Valhalla's constant battle preparation, focusing instead on skills and pleasures that enhanced quality of life rather than combat effectiveness. Warriors spent their time learning crafts that they had neglected during their mortal existence, developing artistic abilities that complemented their martial skills, and engaging in intellectual discussions about topics ranging from agricultural techniques to philosophical questions about the nature of heroism. These activities prepared them for roles in the final battle of Ragnarok that would utilise their complete range of abilities rather than merely their fighting skills. The feast activities in Sessrumnir emphasised abundance and pleasure in ways that reflected Freyja's association with fertility and prosperity. The hall's kitchens, staffed by skilled cooks who had earned their positions through exceptional culinary abilities during their mortal lives, prepared meals that surpassed even the legendary feasts of Valhalla. The menu included delicacies from all 9 realms, with ingredients that possessed both nutritional and magical properties that enhanced the diner's physical and spiritual well-being. Freyja's association with cats, particularly the 2 large felines that drew her chariot across the sky, represented one of the most distinctive aspects of her iconography, while connecting her to ancient fertility symbolism that predated Norse culture by millennia. These cats, described in various sources as being larger than typical domestic felines, yet smaller than the great cats found in distant lands, possess supernatural strength and intelligence that enabled them to traverse the boundaries between worlds while maintaining perfect coordination in their chariot-pulling duties. The cat's origins traced to the magical forests that bordered the realm of Alfheim, where they had developed their extraordinary size and abilities through generations of feeding on prey that included supernatural creatures and plants imbued with a divine essence. Their fur displayed colours that shifted subtly in response to their emotional states and the magical currents surrounding them, typically appearing as deep grey with silver highlights that created patterns resembling runic inscriptions. Their eyes glowed with golden light that intensified during periods of high magical activity, providing them with enhanced night vision and the ability to see through illusions and shape-shifting disguises. The symbolic significance of cats in Norse culture extended beyond their practical value as pest controllers to encompass associations with feminine independence, nocturnal wisdom, and the liminal spaces between domestic and wild environments. Archaeological discoveries of cat remains in high-status graves, often accompanied by elaborate jewellery and ritual objects, suggest that these animals held special significance for women of elevated social position. The graves frequently contain evidence of deliberate ritual treatment, with the cats positioned in ways that indicated their continued service to their human companions in the afterlife. The chariot itself represented masterwork craftsmanship that combined practical transportation needs with ceremonial requirements befitting a major deity. Constructed from wood, harvested from trees that grew at the intersection of multiple realms, the chariot's frame possessed flexibility that allowed it to adapt to different atmospheric conditions while maintaining structural integrity during rapid acceleration and directional changes. The wheels, crafted from metals that had been star-forged in the cosmic fires that preceded world creation, generated no friction against any surface while producing a distinctive musical tone that announced Freyja's approach to those with sufficient magical sensitivity to hear it. The decorative elements adorning Freyja's chariot included intricate carvings that depicted scenes from Vanir mythology, particularly those celebrating fertility cycles and seasonal abundance. These images served both aesthetic and magical purposes, creating visual connections between the chariot's movements and the natural forces that governed agricultural prosperity. The harness system that connected the cats to the chariot utilised leather crafted from the hides of supernatural elk whose strength and endurance exceeded those of ordinary animals, while the metal fittings bore runic inscriptions that ensured perfect communication between driver and team regardless of environmental conditions or magical interference. The conflict between the Aesir and Vanir tribes of gods emerged from fundamental theological and cultural differences that had developed over centuries of separate divine evolution. The Aesir, centered in Asgard under Odin's leadership, emphasized martial prowess, hierarchical authority, and the pursuit of wisdom through sacrifice and struggle. Their society valued individual achievement, honor gained through combat, and the accumulation of knowledge that could provide strategic advantages over enemies. Archaeological evidence from warrior graves across Scandinavia reflects these values, with elaborate weapon deposits and evidence of ritual combat practices that honoured fallen champions. The Vanir, conversely, developed their divine culture around principles of fertility, prosperity, and cyclical renewal that reflected their closer connections to agricultural communities and natural abundance. Their society operated through consensus building rather than hierarchical command structures, with decisions emerging from collective wisdom rather than individual authority. This difference in governance created theological tensions when the two divine groups encountered each other, as their fundamental assumptions about proper divine behaviour and social organisation proved largely incompatible. The immediate cause of the war centred around a mysterious figure known as Gullveig, whose identity and origins remain subjects of scholarly debate despite extensive analysis of the surviving source material. Many modern researchers identify Gullveig with Freyja herself, suggesting that this episode represents a mythological account of the Aesir's initial hostility towards Vanir magical practices and their association with gold and material wealth. Gullveig's arrival in Asgard coincided with the introduction of practices that challenged Aesir assumptions about appropriate divine behaviour, particularly regarding the relationship between spiritual authority and material prosperity. The Aesir's reaction to Gullveig involved multiple attempts to destroy her through burning, a method typically reserved for the most dangerous forms of sorcery and spiritual contamination. The repeated failures of these execution attempts demonstrated that Vanir divine essence operated according to different principles than Aesir theology recognised, with Gullveig emerging from each burning not merely unharmed, but apparently strengthened by the experience. These failures revealed the limitations of Aesir magical knowledge, while highlighting the distinct nature of Vanir's spiritual practices. The 3 unsuccessful burnings of Gullveig created a pattern that established her supernatural resilience, while simultaneously insulting Vanir dignity through the repeated attempts at destruction. Each burning took place in Asgard's main hall, with the assembled Aesir witnessing their inability to eliminate what they perceived as a threat to their established order. The failure of these attempts forced the Aesir to confront the reality that their understanding of divine nature and magical principles was incomplete, creating theological crises that challenged their assumptions about cosmic authority. The Vanir's military response to these provocations demonstrated their formidable power while revealing strategic capabilities that the Aesir had underestimated. Unlike the Aesir's preference for individual heroics and direct confrontation, Vanir warfare emphasized collective action, environmental manipulation, and the integration of magical techniques with conventional military tactics. Their armies included not only divine warriors, but also supernatural beings allied with fertility and prosperity, creating forces that could affect both physical combat and the spiritual conditions underlying military success. The war's initial phases saw the Vanir achieving significant victories through their superior understanding of magical warfare and their ability to coordinate diverse supernatural forces. Their control over weather patterns allowed them to create battlefield conditions that favoured their tactical approaches while hindering Aesir strategies that depended on individual warrior prowess. The Vanir also demonstrated abilities to affect agricultural productivity in territories controlled by Aesir allies, creating economic pressures that complemented their military campaigns. Freyja's role in the conflict extended beyond simple participation to encompass strategic planning, and the coordination of magical resources that proved essential to Vanir military success. Her mastery of Seidr magic provided intelligence-gathering capabilities that allowed Vanir forces to anticipate Aesir movements while concealing their own strategic intentions. The Falcon Cloak's reconnaissance abilities proved particularly valuable, enabling rapid assessment of enemy positions and the identification of vulnerable targets that could be exploited through coordinated attacks. The goddess's participation in actual combat demonstrated the integration of fertility magic with martial applications, creating battlefield effects that transcended conventional military understanding. Her presence could inspire supernatural fertility in the plant life surrounding battlefields, creating obstacles that hindered enemy movement while providing concealment for Vanir forces. Simultaneously, her influence over animal behaviour allowed the coordination of wildlife attacks that supplemented conventional military tactics with unpredictable natural forces. The prolonged nature of the conflict gradually revealed that neither side possessed sufficient advantages to achieve decisive victory without unacceptable losses. The Aesir's individual warrior skills and superior weapons technology balanced against the Vanir's magical capabilities and strategic coordination, creating a military stalemate that threatened to devastate both divine communities. The economic costs of continued warfare began affecting the mortal populations that depended on divine protection and blessing, creating pressures for peaceful resolution that transcended purely military considerations. Diplomatic negotiations between the warring factions required careful management of theological differences while addressing practical concerns about post-war relationships and authority structures. The Aesir's hierarchical approach to negotiation conflicted with Vanir consensus-building practices, necessitating the development of hybrid diplomatic procedures that accommodated both cultural frameworks. These negotiations established precedents for interdivine cooperation that would influence subsequent relationships between different supernatural communities throughout Norse cosmology. The peace treaty that concluded the war incorporated innovative solutions that recognized both sides' legitimate interests while creating mechanisms for ongoing cooperation and conflict resolution. Rather than imposing victory terms that would have created lasting resentment, the agreement established a hostage exchange system that integrated representatives from each divine community into the other social structure. This arrangement ensured that both sides maintained stakes in the continued peace, while facilitating cultural exchange that could prevent future misunderstandings. The selection of hostages reflected careful consideration of each individual's capabilities and their potential contributions to their new communities. Freyja's inclusion in the group sent to Asgard recognized both her magical expertise and her diplomatic skills, qualities that could facilitate Vanir integration into Aesir society while maintaining her distinct cultural identity. Her father Njorda's maritime expertise offered practical benefits for the sea-focused aspects of Aesir territory management, while her brother Freyja's agricultural knowledge addressed concerns about food production and resource management. The journey from Vanaheim to Asgard involved complex logistical arrangements that accommodated the divine nature of the travellers while ensuring their safety during the transition between realms. The route required passage through territories controlled by various supernatural beings whose relationships with both Aesir and Vanir remained uncertain, necessitating diplomatic preparations that established safe passage agreements. These negotiations provided early tests of the new cooperative framework while demonstrating the practical benefits of interdivine collaboration. Freyja's arrival in Asgard created immediate challenges for both herself and her new divine community, as her Vanir practices and theological perspectives differed significantly from established Aesir customs. Her introduction of Seidr magic to the Aesir pantheon required careful navigation of gender role expectations that typically associated receptive, trance-based magical practices with feminine spiritual authority. The Aesir's initial discomfort with these practices reflected their unfamiliarity with magical techniques that emphasized cooperation with supernatural forces rather than domination over them. The integration process involved extensive negotiations regarding the appropriate roles and responsibilities for the Vanir hostages within Asgard's established social hierarchy. Freyja's divine status required recognition of her authority over specific domains, while avoiding conflicts with existing Aesir deities who held related responsibilities. These arrangements established precedents for power sharing that would influence subsequent divine relationships while creating new theological frameworks that incorporated both Aesir and Vanir spiritual principles. Her establishment of residence within Asgard required the construction of appropriate facilities that could accommodate her specific needs, while demonstrating her integration into the divine community. The building of Sessrumnir represented both practical necessity and symbolic statement, creating a space that reflected Vanir architectural principles while conforming to Asgard's overall aesthetic standards. The hall's design incorporated elements from both divine traditions, establishing visual representations of the cultural synthesis that the peace treaty intended to achieve. The cultural exchange facilitated by Freyja's presence in Asgard extended beyond simple coexistence to encompass active collaboration in addressing challenges that required both Aesir and Vanir expertise. Her knowledge of fertility magic proved essential for maintaining agricultural productivity in territories affected by the war's disruptions, while her diplomatic skills facilitated negotiations with supernatural beings whose cooperation was necessary for cosmic stability. These practical applications of Vanir knowledge demonstrated the concrete benefits of divine integration, while validating the peace treaty's underlying assumptions. The theological implications of Freyja's integration into Aesir society created lasting changes in Norse religious understanding that extended far beyond the immediate participants in the hostage exchange. Her introduction of alternative approaches to divine authority, magical practice, and cosmic responsibility challenged Aesir assumptions, while providing new resources for addressing complex supernatural challenges. The synthesis of Aesir and Vanir theological principles created hybrid religious frameworks that proved more adaptable and comprehensive than either tradition had achieved independently. The influence of Freyja's Vanir origins on her unique position within the Aesir pantheon manifested through her retention of distinct cultural practices and theological perspectives that complemented rather than replaced existing divine traditions. Her continued emphasis on fertility, prosperity, and cyclical renewal provided balance to the Aesir's focus on warfare, honour, and linear achievement, creating a more comprehensive divine framework that addressed the full range of human needs and cosmic responsibilities. This integration demonstrated the practical benefits of theological diversity, while establishing models for future intercultural cooperation. The theft of Brisingamen unfolded through a series of events that revealed the complex moral landscape governing divine behaviour in Asgard, where personal desires, political necessity, and cosmic justice intersected in ways that defied simple ethical categorization. The incident began when Loki, driven by his perpetual curiosity about the private affairs of other deities, discovered Freyja's nocturnal activities through his habitual surveillance of Asgard's residents. His shape-shifting abilities allowed him to observe without detection as Freyja departed her hall Sessrumnir during the darkest hours before dawn, her movements suggesting secretive purpose rather than routine divine business. Following Freyja through the winding passages that connected Asgard to the subterranean realms, Loki witnessed her arrival at the workshop of the four dwarven brothers Alfrig, Berling, Dvalin, and Greir. The workshop itself occupied a vast cavern carved from living rock, its walls lined with tools and materials that reflected centuries of accumulated craftsmanship knowledge. Forge fires burned with supernatural intensity, the flames fed by charcoal that produced no smoke, yet generated heat sufficient to work metals that existed nowhere else in the 9 realms. The air shimmered with metallic particles suspended in the heat, creating an atmosphere that seemed to pulse with creative energy. The 4 dwarven craftsmen worked with synchronized precision that suggested decades of collaborative experience. Their movements coordinated as they shaped the golden necklace that would become legendary throughout Norse mythology. Each brother contributed specialized expertise developed through generations of family tradition, their techniques incorporating both physical craftsmanship and magical processes that imbued their creations with supernatural properties. The workshop's organization reflected this specialization, with distinct areas dedicated to different aspects of the creation process, from initial metal purification to final assembly and enchantment. Alfred operated the purification station where raw gold underwent transformation through processes that combined conventional smelting with magical procedures that removed not merely physical impurities but spiritual contamination that could interfere with the finished product's magical properties. His techniques involved incantations in the ancient dwarven tongue, words that resonated with the metal's essential nature while establishing harmonic frequencies that enhanced its receptivity to enchantment. The purified gold emerged from his processes with a radiance that seemed to emanate from within, creating material that appeared almost liquid despite maintaining solid form. Berling's expertise manifested in the creation of chain links that demonstrated technical mastery beyond conventional understanding of metalworking principles. Each link required individual forging using hammers crafted from meteoric iron, their strikes creating patterns of stress and compression that provided flexibility without compromising structural integrity. The finished chains possessed qualities that defied normal physics, appearing substantial enough to support considerable weight while maintaining fluidity that allowed the necklace to conform perfectly to the wearer's movements. The links themselves bore microscopic engravings that served both decorative and magical purposes, their patterns creating visual effects that seemed to shift depending on viewing angle and lighting conditions. Dvalin's contribution involved the application of runic inscriptions using techniques that required both artistic skill and deep knowledge of magical symbolism. His tools included styluses made from the bones of creatures that existed only in the deepest levels of the underworld, their composition allowing the creation of marks that penetrated beyond the metal surface to affect its essential nature. The runes he carved remained invisible to ordinary observation, yet possessed power sufficient to influence cosmic forces, creating connections between the necklace and the fundamental energies that governed fertility, beauty, and divine authority. Each symbol required precise placement and orientation to achieve proper harmonic relationships with adjacent inscriptions, creating a complex magical matrix that functioned as an integrated whole. Greer's specialization encompassed the final assembly process, and the integration of gemstones harvested from the roots of Yggdrasil, materials that contained essence from all 9 realms and provided cosmological connections that enhanced the necklace's overall effectiveness. The stones themselves defied conventional classification, their crystalline structures incorporating elements that existed nowhere else in creation, while displaying optical properties that created mesmerizing visual effects. Setting these gems required techniques that balanced their individual characteristics while creating harmonic resonances that amplified the collective magical impact, a process that demanded both technical precision and intuitive understanding of supernatural forces. When Freyja approached the 4 craftsmen to negotiate for the necklace's acquisition, the resulting discussion revealed the complex relationship between divine authority and personal desire within Norse cosmological frameworks. The dwarfs recognized both her divine status and the extraordinary nature of their creation, understanding that conventional payment methods could not adequately compensate for the time, skill, and magical resources invested in Brisingamen's construction. Their demand that she spend one night with each of them reflected not mere physical desire, but recognition that their masterwork required payment in experiences that possessed unique value impossible to duplicate through material offerings. The negotiation process extended over several hours as Freyja weighed her desire for the necklace against potential consequences of accepting the dwarf's terms. Her decision ultimately reflected Vanir pragmatic values that prioritize practical outcomes over abstract moral considerations, contrasting with our Aesir tendencies to emphasize honor and reputation above material acquisition. The 4 nights she subsequently spent in the dwarven workshop involved exchanges that transcended simple physical intimacy, encompassing discussions of magical techniques, cultural perspectives, and philosophical concepts that enrich both parties' understanding of cosmic relationships. Each night brought different experiences as Freyja learned about dwarven approaches to craftsmanship, magical theory, and the relationship between creative expression and spiritual development. Alfrig shared knowledge of metal purification techniques that could be applied to magical practices beyond metalworking, revealing connections between physical and spiritual purification that enhance Seidr effectiveness. Burling demonstrated flexibility principles that applied to both metalwork and magical thinking, showing how rigid approaches limited creative potential while adaptive methods open new possibilities for innovation and discovery. Dvalin's Night focused on runic theory and the relationship between symbolic representation and magical reality, concepts that expanded Freyja's understanding of how written symbols could influence cosmic forces through precise application of traditional knowledge. His insights into the harmonic relationships between different runic combinations provided her with new techniques for enhancing spell effectiveness while avoiding the dangerous resonances that could produce unintended consequences. Greer's contributions centered on integration principles and the methods for combining diverse magical elements into coherent wholes, knowledge that proved valuable for coordinating complex magical workings that required multiple participants or extended time periods. The completed transaction left Freyja in possession of Brisingamen, while establishing relationships with the 4 dwarven craftsmen that would prove beneficial in future circumstances requiring specialized knowledge or materials. The necklace itself exceeded even her elevated expectations, its appearance combining a visual beauty with magical properties that enhanced her existing divine attributes, while providing new capabilities that expanded her influence across multiple realms. The golden chains seemed to flow around her neck like liquid metal while maintaining solid form, their weight distributing perfectly to avoid discomfort during extended wear. Loki's observation of these events provided him with information that he initially kept secret, recognizing its potential value for future manipulation, while understanding the delicate nature of the situation. His knowledge of Freyja's transaction created opportunities for leverage that could prove useful in his ongoing political maneuvering within Asgard's complex social hierarchy. However, his decision to eventually report these events to Odin reflected calculations that extended beyond simple gossip to encompass broader concerns about divine behavior and cosmic stability. The revelation of Freyja's acquisition method reached Odin through Loki's carefully crafted presentation that emphasized potential threats to divine authority while downplaying his own role as unauthorized observer. Loki's account focused on the precedent-setting nature of Freyja's transaction, suggesting that her willingness to engage in such exchanges could encourage other deities to pursue similar arrangements that might undermine established social hierarchies. His presentation skillfully exploited Odin's concerns about maintaining order within Asgard, while positioning himself as a loyal informant rather than a troublemaker seeking to create conflict. Odin's reaction to this information revealed the complex moral calculations that governed his leadership decisions, as he weighed respect for Freyja's autonomy against concerns about the broader implications of her actions. His initial inclination toward direct confrontation gradually gave way to more subtle approaches that would address his concerns without creating open conflict with a powerful ally whose cooperation remained essential for Asgard's stability. The situation required careful handling that acknowledged both Freyja's legitimate authority over her personal choices and the potential consequences of allowing such precedent to influence other divine relationships. The decision to order Loki to steal Brisingamen emerged from Odin's assessment that indirect action would achieve his objectives while avoiding the political complications that direct intervention might create. This command placed Loki in the position of executing policy decisions that aligned with his natural inclinations toward mischief, while providing him with official sanction for activities that might otherwise result in punishment. The theft would demonstrate divine disapproval of Freyja's methods, while creating opportunities for negotiation that could establish clearer guidelines for future divine behaviour. Loki's approach to the theft required careful planning that took into account both Freyja's supernatural senses and the magical properties of Brisingamen itself, which created protective fields around its resting place that would alert her to conventional intrusion attempts. His solution involved transformation into flea form, a shape that allowed him to enter her private chambers without triggering the necklace's defensive enchantments, while remaining small enough to avoid detection by her enhanced awareness. This transformation required precise control over his shape-shifting abilities, as maintaining flea form for extended periods risked losing human consciousness to insect instincts. The theft itself took place during the deepest hours of night when Freyja's sleep reached its most profound phase, her divine senses temporarily reduced to levels that allowed Loki's infiltration to proceed undetected. Her private chambers within Sessrumnir reflected both her divine status and her personal preferences, furnished with materials that combined luxury with magical functionality. The walls displayed tapestries that depicted scenes from Vanir mythology, while incorporating protective enchantments that normally prevented unauthorized entry, their effectiveness circumvented by Loki's miniature form and his knowledge of their operational principles. Brisingamen rested on a specially constructed pedestal that elevated it above the surrounding furnishings, while providing optimal display of its extraordinary craftsmanship. The golden chains arranged in patterns that maximized their visual impact, while maintaining the magical configurations necessary for proper enchantment function. The necklace's inherent radiance provided subtle illumination that created shifting patterns of light and shadow throughout the chamber, its gems responding to ambient magical currents with colour variations that reflected the cosmic forces affecting the immediate environment. Loki's transformation back to normal size required careful timing and positioning to avoid disturbing Freyja, while enabling him to manipulate the necklace's clasp mechanism, a task complicated by the magical locks that protected against theft attempts. These security measures incorporated both mechanical and supernatural elements, requiring simultaneous manipulation of physical components and magical keys that responded only to authorized users. His success in bypassing these protections demonstrated both his technical skills and his deep understanding of dwarven craftsmanship principles, knowledge acquired through years of interaction with various supernatural artisans. The removal of Brisingamen from its resting place triggered subtle changes in the chamber's magical atmosphere, as the necklace's protective enchantments recognized unauthorized handling, creating disturbances that threatened to wake Freyja despite Loki's careful movements. His escape required rapid departure through the same route he'd used for entry, transforming back to flea form while maintaining possession of the necklace through magical techniques that allowed transportation of objects larger than his assumed form would normally permit. This process demanded precise control over both shape-shifting and dimensional manipulation abilities, skills that few beings possessed in sufficient degree to execute successfully. Freyja's discovery of the theft created one of the most significant crises in Asgard's political history, her reaction combining personal outrage with broader concerns about divine security and the precedents established by successful theft of major magical artifacts. Her immediate response involved comprehensive magical investigation of her chambers, using Seidr techniques that could reveal traces of unauthorized presence while identifying the methods used to bypass her protective enchantments. These investigations quickly revealed evidence of shape-shifting magic and the distinctive magical signature associated with Loki's transformative abilities, providing clear identification of the perpetrator despite his attempts at concealment. The confrontation between Freyja and Odin regarding the theft's authorization revealed the complex moral landscape governing divine leadership decisions, as competing principles of personal autonomy, collective security, and cosmic justice created ethical dilemmas that defied simple resolution. Freyja's arguments emphasized her legitimate authority over personal possessions, while questioning the precedent established by divine-sanctioned theft of legally acquired property. Odin's position focused on broader concerns about divine behavior standards and the potential consequences of allowing individual desires to override collective interests, creating a philosophical debate that extended beyond the immediate circumstances to encompass fundamental questions about divine governance. The resolution negotiations between Freyja and Odin established precedents for divine conflict resolution that would influence subsequent relationships throughout Norse mythology, though their immediate focus remained on recovering Brisingamen and addressing the broader implications of its theft. Heimdall's involvement in these discussions reflected his unique position as guardian of divine security, his extraordinary sensory abilities having detected the necklace's movement despite Loki's concealment efforts. His report detailed the theft's execution while identifying Loki's current location through tracking methods that combined supernatural perception with knowledge of interdimensional travel patterns. The recovery mission required careful coordination between multiple divine participants, each contributing specialized abilities essential for success against Loki's shape-shifting capabilities and his tendency toward unpredictable behavior when cornered. Heimdall's tracking abilities provided continuous location updates, while his combat skills offered necessary backup for situations requiring direct confrontation. Freyja's participation ensured proper identification of her stolen property, while her magical knowledge provided resources for countering any enchantments Loki might employ to maintain possession of Brisingamen. The pursuit led across multiple realms, as Loki employed his knowledge of interdimensional pathways to avoid capture while seeking allies or resources that might enable him to negotiate favourable terms for the necklace's return. His journey took him through territories controlled by various supernatural beings whose relationships with Asgard's authorities remained ambiguous, creating opportunities for political complications that could escalate beyond simple theft recovery to encompass broader diplomatic concerns. These travels demonstrated both his desperation to avoid immediate consequences and his understanding that direct confrontation with Heimdall would likely result in defeat despite his considerable abilities. The final confrontation occurred at Singerstein, a location whose significance extended beyond its role as the site of divine combat to encompass broader symbolic meanings related to cosmic boundaries and the resolution of conflicts between opposing forces. The rocky outcropping provided neutral ground, where neither participant possessed territorial advantages, while its position at the intersection of multiple realms created magical conditions that enhanced both combatants' supernatural abilities. The site's history included previous divine conflicts, its stones bearing traces of magical energies that influenced the behavior of supernatural beings who fought within its boundaries. Heimdall's transformation into seal form for the combat reflected both tactical considerations and symbolic appropriateness, as seals possess swimming abilities essential for fighting in the coastal environment, while their streamlined forms provided advantages in underwater combat situations. His choice of animal form demonstrated careful analysis of the battlefield conditions, while showcasing shape-shifting abilities that rivaled Loki's own transformative skills. The seal's enhanced senses complemented Heimdall's already extraordinary perceptual capabilities, creating sensory advantages that would prove crucial during the extended underwater portions of their conflict. Loki's corresponding transformation created a battle between equals in terms of physical capabilities while highlighting their fundamental differences in motivation and tactical approach. His seal form possessed similar swimming abilities while incorporating modifications that reflected his trickster nature, including enhanced agility and the capacity for rapid directional changes that could confuse opponents expecting conventional combat patterns. The transformation also provided him with temporary respite from the psychological pressures of carrying stolen property, as animal instincts temporarily overshadowed the complex moral calculations that had driven his theft decision. The underwater combat phase tested both participants' endurance and adaptability as they maneuvered through three-dimensional space, where traditional fighting techniques required modification to account for water resistance and buoyancy effects. Their battle created disturbances that affected local marine life, while generating magical currents that influenced weather patterns across the surrounding region. The extended duration of their conflict reflected both combatants' determination and their relatively equal capabilities, with neither able to achieve decisive advantage through purely physical means. The resolution came through Heimdall's superior tactical planning and his ability to anticipate Loki's evasion patterns based on detailed observation of his behavioural tendencies during previous conflicts. His victory secured Brisingamen's recovery while establishing his reputation as Asgard's most effective security enforcer, capabilities that would prove essential during future crises requiring specialised intervention. The combat's conclusion demonstrated that even Loki's considerable abilities had limits when confronted by opponents who combined superior planning with equivalent supernatural capabilities. Brisingamen's return to Freyja restored both her personal property and her confidence in Asgard's commitment to protecting divine rights, though the incident created lasting changes in security protocols and interpersonal relationships that would influence subsequent divine interactions. The necklace's brief absence had allowed her to recognise how thoroughly it had become integrated into her identity and magical practices, its return bringing relief that extended beyond simple material recovery to encompass restoration of her complete divine capabilities. The experience also provided insights into the vulnerability of even the most powerful magical artefacts when faced with determined theft attempts employing sophisticated supernatural techniques. The broader implications of the theft and recovery extended beyond the immediate participants to encompass questions about divine property rights, the authority of leadership decisions that affected individual possessions, and the precedents established by successful resistance to unauthorized confiscation. These issues would continue influencing divine relationships long after Brisingamen's return, creating ongoing tensions that reflected fundamental disagreements about the balance between individual autonomy and collective authority within Asgard's social structure. The relationship between Freyja and the giants represented one of the most complex aspects of Norse mythology, encompassing conflicts that ranged from direct confrontation to subtle manipulation while revealing the ongoing tensions that characterized interactions between different categories of supernatural beings. These encounters demonstrated both her vulnerability to giant schemes and her resourcefulness in defending herself against threats that often exceeded her individual capabilities. The giant's consistent interest in acquiring her as a prize reflected both her extraordinary beauty and her strategic value as a powerful deity whose capture would significantly weaken Asgard's defensive capabilities. The myth of the giant builder who demanded Freyja, along with the sun and moon, as payment for constructing Asgard's protective wall, represents one of the most significant examples of how giants attempted to exploit divine needs for their own advantage. This unnamed giant approached the gods during a period when Asgard's defences required strengthening following conflicts that had damaged existing fortifications, his timing demonstrating sophisticated understanding of divine vulnerabilities and political necessities. His proposal offered solutions to genuine security concerns while creating opportunities for acquiring prizes that would fundamentally alter the balance of power between gods and giants. The wall's construction requirements exceeded normal building capabilities, demanding materials and techniques that combined conventional masonry with magical processes essential for creating barriers effective against supernatural threats. The giant specifications called for stones quarried from specific locations, where geological forces had created rock formations imbued with protective properties, materials that required transportation across vast distances through territories controlled by hostile supernatural beings. The construction timeline established ambitious completion deadlines that would test even supernatural building capabilities while creating pressure for divine acceptance of terms that might otherwise seem unacceptable. The giants' demand for payment revealed sophisticated understanding of divine psychology and the strategic value of specific individuals within Asgard's social hierarchy. Freyja's inclusion in his price reflected recognition of her importance as both a powerful deity and a symbol of divine beauty, whose loss would demoralize the gods while providing the giants with leverage for future negotiations. The sun and moon's inclusion demonstrated his grasp of cosmic mechanics and the catastrophic consequences their loss would create for all realms, making his demands so extreme that their fulfillment would effectively ensure giant dominance over the entire cosmological order. The gods' initial consideration of these terms reflected their desperate need for improved defences balanced against the unacceptable nature of the proposed payment, creating internal debates that reveal different perspectives on acceptable risk levels and the relative value of individual versus collective security. Some divine voices argued for acceptance based on the wall's strategic necessity, while others emphasized the precedent that would be established by surrendering major deities to giant demands. These discussions demonstrated the complex decision-making processes that govern divine policy while highlighting the challenges of maintaining unity when facing existential threats. Loki's proposal of a modified agreement that would allow the giant to attempt the construction while reducing the likelihood of successful completion represented his characteristic approach to problem-solving through manipulation and calculated risk-taking. His suggested timeline modifications and requirement that the giant work without assistance created conditions that appeared to offer fair terms while actually making success virtually impossible given the project's scope and complexity. This solution demonstrated his ability to identify win-win scenarios that satisfied immediate needs while avoiding unacceptable long-term consequences. The giant's acceptance of these modified terms reflected either overconfidence in his capabilities or understanding that the construction process itself would provide opportunities for renegotiation once work had progressed sufficiently to make cancellation costly for the gods. His agreement to work alone except for his horse Svadilfari suggested confidence that his supernatural abilities and his mount's extraordinary strength would prove sufficient for completing the massive project within the established time frame. The horse's inclusion in the agreement created a potential vulnerability that the giant may not have fully considered despite his otherwise careful planning. The construction process revealed the giant's extraordinary capabilities as he quarried, transported, and positioned massive stone blocks with efficiency that exceeded divine expectations while maintaining quality standards that ensured the wall's effectiveness against supernatural threats. His work methods combined conventional construction techniques with magical processes that enhanced both material properties and structural integrity, creating fortifications that surpassed existing divine defensive capabilities. The rapid progress of construction created growing concern among the gods that their modified agreement might not prevent the giant's success despite their expectations. Svadilfari's contribution to the construction effort proved more significant than the gods had anticipated, the supernatural horse demonstrating strength and endurance that enabled transportation of materials that would have required multiple conventional animals working in coordination. The horse's ability to navigate difficult terrain while carrying enormous loads provided crucial support for maintaining the ambitious construction schedule, its performance suggesting that the giant's confidence in meeting the deadline might prove justified despite the project's apparent impossibility. As the construction deadline approached with the wall nearing completion, the gods faced the prospect of honouring their agreement and surrendering Freyja, the sun, and the moon to fulfil their contractual obligations. This situation created panic within Asgard's leadership, as they confronted the reality that their attempts to manipulate the agreement had failed to prevent the giant's success. The approaching deadline forced them to consider alternative solutions that could prevent the catastrophic consequences of fulfilling their promised payment while avoiding the equally dangerous precedent of breaking divine oaths. Loki's transformation into a mare to seduce Svadilfari represented a desperate attempt to sabotage the construction project by removing the giant's most crucial resource during the critical final phase of work. This plan required precise timing to maximize disruption, while minimizing the risk of discovery that could result in violent retaliation from the giant. The seduction's success depended on Loki's ability to maintain mare form for extended periods, while convincing Svadilfari to abandon his construction duties in favour of pursuing romantic opportunities. The mare's appearance in the construction area during crucial work periods created immediate distraction for Svadilfari, whose attention divided between his assigned tasks and his growing interest in the attractive female horse that had appeared in his territory. Loki's performance in mare form demonstrated his shape-shifting expertise, while requiring him to suppress his natural personality traits in favour of convincing equine behaviour patterns. The gradual escalation of the seduction created mounting tension as the giant attempted to maintain construction progress, while dealing with his horse's increasing distraction and eventual abandonment of work responsibilities. The giant's discovery of this sabotage triggered violent confrontation with the gods, his rage at their deception overwhelming any concerns about fighting multiple divine opponents simultaneously. His transformation into his true giant form revealed physical capabilities that had remained concealed during the construction project, his size and strength creating immediate threats to Asgard's security, despite the incomplete state of the protective wall. The battle demonstrated both his formidable combat abilities and the gods' collective strength when united against external threats. Thor's arrival and intervention in the conflict provided the decisive force necessary to defeat the giant, his hammer Mjolnir delivering the fatal blow that ended both the construction project and the threat to Freyja's freedom. The giant's death resolved the immediate crisis while creating new complications regarding the incomplete wall and the precedent established by divine contract violation. Thor's actions demonstrated his role as Asgard's primary defender against giant threats, while highlighting the violent solutions that often proved necessary when diplomatic manipulation failed to achieve desired outcomes. The aftermath of this incident established important precedents for divine-giant relationships, while creating ongoing consequences that would influence future interactions between these supernatural communities. The incomplete wall remained as evidence of both divine desperation and their willingness to employ deception to avoid unacceptable agreements, while the giant's death demonstrated the ultimate consequences of threatening core divine interests. Loki's pregnancy resulting from his time in mare form created additional complications that would manifest in the birth of Sleipnir, Odin's eight-legged horse, adding supernatural offspring to the already complex legacy of this episode. The story of Thrymr and Thor's stolen hammer presented another significant example of giant attempts to acquire Freyja through manipulation and extortion, though this incident involved different tactics and motivations than the wall builder's direct contractual approach. Thrymr's theft of Mjolnir represented a calculated strike against Asgard's primary defensive capability, creating a crisis that threatened divine security while providing leverage for negotiations that could achieve his romantic objectives. The hammer's strategic importance made its recovery essential, regardless of the costs involved, creating opportunities for giant manipulation that Thrymr exploited with considerable skill. The theft's discovery created immediate panic within Asgard, as Thor's search for his missing weapon revealed the scope of the security breach and its implications for divine defensive capabilities. Mjolnir's unique properties made it irreplaceable as both a weapon and a symbol of divine authority, its absence leaving Thor significantly weakened, while creating vulnerability that hostile forces could exploit. The hammer's theft demonstrated that even the most carefully guarded divine possessions remained vulnerable to determine theft attempts, employing sophisticated planning and execution. Loki's investigative mission to Jotunheim, undertaken while wearing Freyja's Falcon cloak, provided crucial intelligence about the theft's perpetrator and his demands for the hammer's return. His transformation into Falcon form enabled reconnaissance activities that would have been impossible using conventional approaches, the bird's natural abilities complementing his shape-shifting skills to create effective surveillance capabilities. The journey through giant territory required careful navigation of political boundaries and territorial claims that could result in capture or death if discovered by hostile forces. Thrymir's successful infiltration of Asgard to steal Mjolnir revealed the Giant King's sophisticated understanding of divine vulnerabilities and his willingness to exploit them for personal gain. His reconnaissance of Asgard's security measures had identified the specific timing and methods necessary to acquire Thor's hammer without triggering immediate retaliation, demonstrating planning capabilities that exceeded typical giant approaches to divine conflict. The theft occurred during a period when Thor had left Mjolnir unattended, while participating in diplomatic negotiations with representatives from Midgard, his absence creating the opportunity that Thrymr had patiently awaited. The Giant King's demand for Freyja as his bride in exchange for Mjolnir's return created a crisis that tested the limits of divine solidarity and revealed the complex calculations underlying Asgard's political relationships. His message, delivered through intermediaries who could traverse the boundaries between realms safely, specified not merely Freyja's hand in marriage, but also elaborate wedding ceremonies that would publicly demonstrate giant authority over divine affairs. These requirements indicated that Thrymr's motivations extended beyond simple romantic desire to encompass broader political objectives aimed at establishing giant dominance over the gods. Freyja's reaction to these demands combined personal outrage with strategic analysis of the implications for divine-giant relationships, her response revealing both her fierce independence and her understanding of the precedents that would be established by compliance with such extortion. Her refusal to consider marriage to Thrymr reflected not merely personal preference, but recognition that such a union would compromise her divine authority, while creating opportunities for giant infiltration of Asgard's internal affairs. The intensity of her anger reportedly caused Brisingamen to glow with unusual brightness, while her whole Sesrumnir trembled from the magical energies generated by her emotional response. The Divine Council's deliberations regarding appropriate responses to Thrymr's demands revealed significant disagreements about acceptable risk levels and the relative importance of individual autonomy versus collective security needs. Some voices argued for military action to recover Mjolnir through force, while others emphasized the strategic advantages of negotiation that might avoid costly warfare while achieving desired outcomes. These debates demonstrated the complex decision-making processes that govern divine policy, while highlighting the challenges of maintaining consensus when facing threats that affected both individual and collective interests. Heimdall's proposal that Thor disguise himself as Freyja to infiltrate the giant wedding represented an innovative solution that addressed multiple concerns simultaneously, while exploiting giant assumptions about divine behavior and gender roles. This plan required Thor to suppress his natural aggressive tendencies in favor of convincing feminine behavior patterns, a transformation that challenged both his personal identity and Norse cultural expectations about appropriate masculine conduct. The disguise's effectiveness would depend on Thor's ability to maintain character consistency, while positioning himself for the surprise attack that would enable Mjolnir's recovery. The preparation process for Thor's transformation involved extensive collaboration between multiple divine participants, each contributing specialized knowledge essential for creating a convincing disguise that could withstand close examination by suspicious giants. Freyja's participation proved crucial for providing authentic clothing, jewelry, and behavioral guidance that would enable Thor to pass as a divine bride despite his obviously masculine physical characteristics. Her willingness to loan her precious possessions for this deception demonstrated both her commitment to collective divine interests and her confidence in the plan's potential for success. Loki's assignment as Thor's bridesmaid reflected both his shape-shifting expertise and his diplomatic skills, qualities that would prove essential for managing the complex social interactions required during the wedding festivities. His role involved not merely supporting Thor's disguise, but also gathering intelligence about giant defensive preparations and identifying opportunities for coordinated action that could maximize the mission's chances of success. The bridesmaid position provided legitimate access to areas and conversations that would otherwise remain off-limits to divine infiltrators. The journey to Jotunheim required careful planning to avoid detection while maintaining the disguise's credibility, with the travelling party's composition and behaviour patterns designed to reinforce the impression of a legitimate wedding procession. The route selection involved diplomatic considerations regarding territorial boundaries and the political implications of divine presence in giant lands, creating opportunities for misunderstandings that could escalate beyond the immediate mission objectives. The travellers' arrival at Thrymir's hall marked the beginning of the most dangerous phase of their infiltration attempt. Thrymir's reception of his supposed bride revealed both his genuine enthusiasm for the marriage and his underlying suspicions about the ease with which his demands had apparently been met. The Giant King's behaviour during the initial meeting demonstrated careful observation of his guests while maintaining appropriate hospitality standards that reflected his political sophistication and understanding of diplomatic protocols. His comments about Freyja's appearance and behaviour patterns suggested growing awareness that something about the situation differed from his expectations, creating tension that threatened to expose the deception. The wedding feast provided the crucial test of Thor's disguise, as extended social interaction created multiple opportunities for behavioural inconsistencies that could reveal his true identity. The meal's progression required him to navigate complex etiquette requirements while suppressing his natural appetite and aggressive tendencies, challenges that proved increasingly difficult as the evening progressed. His consumption of enormous quantities of food and drink, while consistent with his divine nature, exceeded normal expectations for feminine behaviour and created suspicions among the giant guests. Loki's quick thinking in providing explanations for Thor's unusual behaviour demonstrated his diplomatic skills while revealing his deep understanding of both divine psychology and giant cultural expectations. His improvisations regarding Freyja's supposed fasting period and emotional state provided plausible explanations for the behavioural anomalies, while redirecting attention toward romantic anticipation rather than deception concerns. These interventions proved crucial for maintaining the disguise's credibility during moments when Thor's natural personality traits threatened to break through his feminine facade. The presentation of Mjolnir as part of the wedding ceremony created the opportunity that the infiltration mission had been designed to achieve, though the hammer's positioning required careful manoeuvring to ensure Thor's access while avoiding suspicion about his intentions. Thrymir's decision to include the hammer in the ceremony reflected his desire to demonstrate his power over divine artifacts while creating symbolic connections between his marriage and his dominance over Asgard's military capabilities. The moment when Thor grasped his weapon marked the transition from deception to direct action that would determine the mission's ultimate success or failure. Thor's revelation of his true identity and subsequent attack on the assembled giants demonstrated both his combat effectiveness and the violent consequences that often resulted from divine giant conflicts when diplomatic solutions failed. His assault eliminated not merely Thrymr, but also numerous other giant leaders whose deaths would significantly impact future giant-divine relationships, while establishing precedents for the treatment of extortion attempts. The battle's intensity reflected years of accumulated tensions between the supernatural communities, while highlighting the ultimate reliance on force when negotiation proved insufficient. The mission's success in recovering Mjolnir, while eliminating a significant giant threat, established important precedents for divine responses to future extortion attempts, while demonstrating the effectiveness of coordinated deception when supported by appropriate planning and execution. The operation's conclusion restored both Thor's combat capabilities and divine confidence in their ability to address giant threats through innovative approaches that combined intelligence gathering with direct action. The incident also reinforced Freyja's value as both a strategic asset and a symbol worth protecting against hostile acquisition attempts. Freyja's marriage to Odin represented one of the most mysterious and emotionally complex relationships in Norse mythology, its dynamics shaped by his frequent unexplained absences that created ongoing uncertainty about their union's stability and future prospects. Odin's identity remained ambiguous throughout the surviving sources, with some scholars suggesting connections to Odin himself, while others proposed that he represented a separate deity whose domains overlapped with but remained distinct from the Allfather's areas of authority. This uncertainty extended to questions about his motivations for travel and the specific activities that required his extended departures from Asgard. The marriage's establishment occurred during the period following Freyja's integration into Aesir society, when her position within Asgard's social hierarchy had stabilized sufficiently to support long-term personal relationships with other divine beings. The union represented not merely romantic attraction, but also political alliance that strengthened connections between Vanir traditions and Aesir cultural frameworks, creating opportunities for continued theological synthesis that benefited both divine communities. The wedding ceremonies reportedly incorporated elements from both religious traditions, establishing precedents for hybrid rituals that acknowledged the cultural diversity within Asgard's expanded pantheon. Odin's early behaviour patterns suggested deep commitment to their relationship, his presence providing emotional stability that complemented Freyja's often intense personality while supporting her adjustment to life among the Aesir. Their shared interests in travel, exploration, and the acquisition of knowledge created common ground that transcended their different cultural backgrounds, while providing foundations for mutual understanding and respect. The marriage's initial phases demonstrated compatibility that extended beyond physical attraction to encompass intellectual partnership and shared commitment to personal growth through new experiences. The onset of Odin's mysterious absences created fundamental changes in their relationship dynamics as Freyja confronted the reality of extended separation without clear explanations for his departure timing or expected return schedules. His travels appeared to follow patterns that she could not predict or influence, leaving her unable to plan her own activities around his presence or absence. The uncertainty created emotional stress that manifested through various symptoms, including the famous golden tears that fell whenever her grief over his absence became overwhelming. These golden tears possessed supernatural properties that reflected both Freyja's divine nature and the intensity of her emotional pain, transforming upon contact with Earth into precious metal that retained connections to her spiritual essence. The tear's composition included not merely gold, but also trace elements that created unique alloys with properties that exceeded conventional precious metals in both beauty and magical potential. Archaeological discoveries of unusual gold deposits in areas associated with Freyja worship have led some researchers to speculate about possible connections to these legendary tears, though definitive proof remains elusive. The tear's formation process involved complex magical transformations that converted emotional energy into physical matter, through mechanisms that operated according to principles not fully understood by contemporary observers. Each tear contained crystallized essence of Freyja's feelings, creating objects that served as permanent records of her emotional states during periods of particular distress. The resulting gold possessed qualities that made it highly sought after by craftsmen and magical practitioners who recognised its unique properties and potential applications in specialised projects. Freyja's searches for her missing husband took her across all 9 realms as she pursued rumours and reports that might indicate his location or activities, these journeys revealing both her determination to maintain their relationship and her growing expertise in interdimensional travel. Her investigations involved questioning various supernatural beings who might have encountered Odin during his travels, creating networks of information sources that proved valuable for other divine activities beyond simple husband hunting. The searches also demonstrated her diplomatic skills as she negotiated safe passage through territories controlled by potentially hostile forces. The emotional toll of these repeated searches manifested through changes in Freyja's behaviour patterns and magical practices, her increasing frustration with Odin's absences affecting her relationships with other divine beings, while influencing her approach to her various responsibilities. Her mood swings became more pronounced during periods when searches proved unsuccessful, creating tensions within Asgard's social environment that required careful management by other deities who valued her contributions to collective divine activities. These behavioural changes also affected her magical effectiveness, with her emotional state directly influencing the power and reliability of her Seidr practices. The mystery surrounding Odin's destinations and activities during his absences created ongoing speculation among both divine and mortal observers who attempted to understand the motivations driving his extended travels. Some theories suggested connections to cosmic responsibilities that required his presence in distant realms, while others proposed personal quests for knowledge or power that could not be accomplished while maintaining domestic relationships. The lack of definitive information about his activities created opportunities for various interpretations that reflected the observer's own assumptions about appropriate divine behaviour and marital obligations. Odin's occasional returns provided temporary resolution to Freyja's emotional distress, while creating new complications as their reunions required renegotiation of relationship dynamics that had been disrupted by extended separation. These homecomings reportedly involved passionate reconciliations that temporarily restored their earlier harmony, while failing to address the underlying issues that drove his departure patterns. The cyclical nature of separation and reunion created emotional instability that affected not merely their personal relationship but also Freyja's broader divine activities and social connections. The relationship's impact on Freyja's interactions with other major deities revealed how personal, emotional states could influence political relationships and collaborative activities within Asgard's complex social environment. Her periodic distress over Odin's absences created opportunities for other deities to provide support and comfort, relationships that sometimes developed into deeper friendships or alliances that extended beyond simple emotional assistance. These connections demonstrated both her vulnerability and her capacity for forming meaningful relationships, despite the ongoing uncertainty in her primary, romantic partnership. Freyja's relationship with Odin represented one of the most politically and magically significant connections within the Norse pantheon. Their interactions shaped by mutual respect for each other's expertise, while maintaining distinct spheres of authority that occasionally created competitive tensions. Their initial contact occurred during the period immediately following her arrival in Asgard, when Odin's curiosity about Vanir magical practices led him to seek instruction in Seidr techniques that differed fundamentally from his existing knowledge base. This educational relationship established foundations for ongoing collaboration, while highlighting the cultural differences that distinguished Aesir and Vanir, approaches to divine authority and magical practice. Odin's eagerness to learn Seidr from Freyja reflected both his insatiable appetite for knowledge and his recognition that Vanir magical traditions offered capabilities that could enhance his existing powers while providing new tools for addressing cosmic challenges. The instruction process required him to adopt learning postures that challenged traditional Aesir assumptions about appropriate masculine behaviour, as Seidr techniques emphasised receptivity and intuitive connection with supernatural forces rather than the active domination that characterised most Aesir magical practices. This educational relationship created opportunities for cultural exchange that extended beyond simple technique transfer to encompass broader philosophical discussions about the nature of divine power and cosmic responsibility. The magical knowledge that Freyja shared with Odin included not merely technical procedures, but also theoretical frameworks that explained the underlying principles governing Seidr effectiveness, and the relationship between practitioner consciousness and magical outcomes. Her instruction emphasized the importance of emotional authenticity and spiritual openness in achieving reliable magical results, concepts that required Odin to modify his typically calculating approach to divine activities. These lessons created lasting changes in his magical practices, while establishing precedents for continued collaboration in addressing challenges that required combined Aesir and Vanir expertise. Their collaborative activities extended beyond magical instruction to encompass joint responses to threats that required both Odin's strategic planning capabilities and Freyja's specialized knowledge of fertility magic, shape-shifting techniques, and interdimensional travel. These partnerships demonstrated the practical benefits of Aesir-Vanir cooperation, while creating opportunities for developing mutual understanding that transcended their initial cultural differences. The success of their joint efforts established patterns of collaboration that would prove essential during subsequent crises, requiring coordinated divine intervention. The competitive aspects of their relationship emerged from their overlapping interests in magical knowledge, divine authority, and the acquisition of supernatural artifacts that could enhance their respective capabilities. Both deities possessed strong personalities and ambitious goals that sometimes created conflicts over resources, opportunities, or recognition for achievements that involved collaborative efforts. These tensions required careful management to prevent escalation into open conflict that could destabilize Asgard's political environment, while compromising their ability to address external threats effectively. Freyja's interactions with Thor revealed a relationship characterized by mutual respect and complementary capabilities that created effective partnerships despite their significantly different approaches to problem-solving and divine responsibility. Thor's straightforward, action-oriented personality contrasted sharply with her preference for subtle manipulation and magical solutions, yet their combined efforts often achieved results that neither could accomplish independently. Their collaboration during the Brisingamen recovery mission demonstrated how their different skill sets could be integrated to address complex challenges requiring both diplomatic finesse and direct action capabilities. The protective aspects of their relationship manifested through Thor's consistent willingness to defend Freyja against giant threats and other dangers that exceeded her individual combat capabilities, while she provided magical support and strategic advice that enhanced his effectiveness in situations requiring more than simple physical force. Their partnership reflected broader patterns of divine cooperation that acknowledged individual limitations while maximizing collective capabilities through coordinated action. These protective instincts created emotional bonds that transcended simple professional collaboration to encompass genuine friendship and mutual concern for each other's welfare. Their occasional disagreements typically centered on appropriate response strategies for addressing threats that could be resolved through either diplomatic negotiation or direct confrontation, with Freyja generally favouring approaches that minimised violence while Thor preferred solutions that eliminated problems through decisive action. These philosophical differences created productive tensions that often resulted in hybrid strategies combining elements from both approaches, creating more comprehensive solutions than either deity might develop independently. Their ability to resolve these disagreements through discussion and compromise demonstrated the maturity of their relationship and their commitment to effective collaboration. Freyja's relationship with Loki encompassed perhaps the most complex and unpredictable dynamics within Asgard's social environment. Their interactions characterized by alternating periods of cooperation and conflict that reflected both their shared interests and their fundamentally different approaches to achieving desired outcomes. Loki's fascination with her magical abilities and his respect for her intelligence created foundations for friendship that survived numerous incidents where his mischievous nature created problems that affected her directly or indirectly. Their relationship demonstrated both the possibilities and the risks associated with forming close connections with individuals whose moral frameworks differed significantly from conventional divine standards. The collaborative aspects of their relationship proved particularly valuable during situations requiring innovative solutions to complex problems that conventional approaches could not address effectively. Loki's creative thinking and willingness to employ unconventional methods complemented Freyja's magical expertise and diplomatic skills, creating partnerships that could achieve objectives through approaches that other divine combinations might not consider. Their joint efforts often involved calculated risks and morally ambiguous actions that achieved beneficial outcomes while creating precedents that influenced subsequent divine behavior patterns. The conflicts that periodically disrupted their friendship typically resulted from Loki's tendency toward manipulation and his occasional disregard for the consequences of his actions on others, behaviours that clashed with Freyja's expectations regarding appropriate treatment of allies and friends. His involvement in the Brisingamen theft represented one of the most serious breaches of trust in their relationship, creating lasting damage that required extensive reconciliation efforts to repair. These incidents demonstrated both the fragility of relationships built on mutual benefit, rather than shared values, and the potential for forgiveness when underlying respect and affection remained intact despite temporary betrayals. Their shared interest in shapeshifting and magical experimentation created opportunities for collaborative learning that enhanced both deities' capabilities while providing foundations for continued friendship despite their periodic conflicts. These activities involved exploring the boundaries of their transformative abilities while developing new techniques that expanded their options for addressing various challenges and opportunities. The knowledge gained through these experiments proved valuable for both individual development and collective divine activities that required specialized magical support. The mystical art of Seidr represented perhaps the most distinctive and transformative contribution that Freyja brought to Aesir society, introducing magical practices that fundamentally differed from the runic traditions and direct divine interventions typically employed by Odin and his pantheon. This shamanic practice originated among the Vanir as a sophisticated system of spiritual techniques that enabled practitioners to manipulate fate threads, commune with spirits across dimensional boundaries, and access prophetic knowledge through altered states of consciousness. Archaeological evidence from ritual sites across Scandinavia reveals specialized implements and burial practices associated with Seidr practitioners, including distinctive staffs topped with iron rings, collections of unusual stones and crystals, and grave goods that suggest high social status within their communities. The fundamental principles underlying Seidr magic emphasized receptivity and spiritual openness, rather than the active domination of supernatural forces that characterized most Aesir magical practices. Practitioners entered trance states that allowed their consciousness to separate temporarily from physical constraints, enabling travel through spiritual realms where they could observe the intricate web of fate connections that governed mortal and divine destinies. These journeys required extensive preparation, including ritual purification, fasting periods that could last for days, and the construction of sacred spaces using portable altars decorated with symbols that created protective barriers against hostile spiritual entities. The physical implements essential for Seidr practice reflected both practical necessity and symbolic significance, with each tool serving specific functions within the complex ritual framework that enabled successful magical workings. The Seidr staff, known as a voller or gander, stood as the most recognizable symbol of the practice, its construction requiring materials gathered from locations where multiple realms intersected. The wooden shaft typically came from trees that had been struck by lightning or grown in places where significant deaths had occurred, their exposure to supernatural forces imbuing them with enhanced receptivity to spiritual influences. The metalhead featured iron rings that created distinctive sounds during ritual movements, their musical tones serving both to focus the practitioner's attention and to communicate with spiritual entities that responded to specific acoustic frequencies. The preparation of Seidr staffs involved elaborate consecration rituals that established connections between the implement and the cosmic forces that governed fate manipulation and prophetic revelation. Master practitioners carved runic inscriptions along the shaft, using tools made from meteoric iron, their symbols creating harmonic relationships that enhanced the staff's effectiveness while providing protection against spiritual backlash that could result from unsuccessful magical attempts. The finished staffs possessed unique acoustic properties that enabled them to detect subtle vibrations in the spiritual atmosphere, changes that indicated the presence of supernatural beings or shifts in the fate patterns that governed future events. Freyja's mastery of Seidr techniques exceeded that of any other known practitioner, her abilities encompassing not merely the standard practices of prophecy and spirit communication, but also advanced applications, including large-scale fate manipulation and the coordination of magical workings that involved multiple participants across extended time periods. Her instruction of these techniques to Odin created one of the most significant transfers of magical knowledge in Norse mythology, introducing the Allfather to practices that required fundamental changes in his approach to divine authority and cosmic responsibility. The learning process challenged Odin's natural tendencies toward control and domination, as Seidr effectiveness depended on surrender to spiritual forces rather than attempts to command them. The gender dynamics surrounding Seidr practice created complex social tensions within Norse society, where the techniques were traditionally associated with feminine spiritual authority, and the receptive consciousness states that cultural norms attributed primarily to women. Male practitioners faced accusations of ergi, a concept encompassing unmanliness and inappropriate adoption of feminine characteristics that could result in social ostracism and loss of masculine honour. Odin's decision to learn Seidr from Freyja required him to accept these social risks while demonstrating that the practice's strategic value outweighed concerns about gender role violations and cultural expectations regarding appropriate masculine behaviour. The training process that Freyja provided to Odin involved gradual introduction to increasingly complex techniques, beginning with basic trance induction methods that allowed controlled separation of consciousness from physical constraints. These initial lessons required him to suppress his natural aggressive instincts and analytical thinking patterns in favour of intuitive receptivity that enabled spiritual perception of normally invisible phenomena. The progression from simple meditation techniques to advanced fate manipulation required months of practice, with each stage building upon previous accomplishments while introducing new challenges that tested both magical skill and psychological flexibility. The theoretical framework underlying Seidr practice encompassed sophisticated understanding of cosmic mechanics and the relationship between individual consciousness and universal fate patterns that govern the destinies of both mortals and divine beings. Practitioners learned to perceive the intricate web of cause and effect relationships that connected all actions across time and space, their enhanced awareness enabling identification of crucial decision points where small interventions could produce significant changes in eventual outcomes. This knowledge required careful application, as inappropriate manipulation of fate threads could create paradoxes and unintended consequences that affected not merely immediate targets but entire communities and their descendants. The prophetic aspects of Seidr involved techniques that enabled practitioners to observe potential future developments through examination of current fate patterns and their probable evolution under different circumstance scenarios. These visions rarely provided definitive predictions, but rather showed ranges of possibilities that could manifest depending on choices made by key individuals and the influence of external factors that remained beyond mortal control. The interpretation of prophetic visions required extensive experience and deep understanding of symbolic language that spiritual entities used to communicate complex information through images and sensations that transcended conventional linguistic expression. Shapeshifting through Seidr represented one of the most advanced applications of the practice, requiring practitioners to achieve such complete identification with animal consciousness that their physical forms could undergo temporary transformation, while maintaining enough human awareness to control the change and ensure successful return to original form. Freyja's expertise in this area enabled her to assume various animal shapes, including her famous Falcon form, each transformation providing specific capabilities suited to different magical purposes while requiring distinct preparation techniques and consciousness adjustment methods. The risks associated with shapeshifting included potential loss of human identity during extended transformations and vulnerability to spiritual attack, while consciousness remained divided between human and animal awareness. The Falcon transformation that Freyja employed for rapid travel and reconnaissance required careful preparation that aligned her consciousness with predatory bird instincts, while maintaining sufficient human awareness to control flight direction and duration. The process involved gradual mental identification with Falcon characteristics, including enhanced visual perception, spatial orientation adapted to three-dimensional aerial movement, and predatory instincts that provided survival advantages during dangerous journeys through hostile territories. The transformation's effectiveness depended on her ability to suppress human emotional responses and analytical thinking patterns that could interfere with the bird's natural behavioral patterns and flight capabilities. Archaeological discoveries across Scandinavia provide substantial evidence for the historical practice of Seidr and its connection to Freyja worship, with excavations revealing specialized burial sites that contained implements and arrangements suggesting the deceased had served as magical practitioners during their lifetimes. These graves typically included Seidr staffs, collections of unusual stones and crystals that served as focusing tools, and evidence of ritual treatment that differed significantly from standard burial practices. The graves' locations often corresponded to sites where later Christian sources reported persistent pagan practices, suggesting continuity between prehistoric shamanic traditions and the historical Seidr practitioners described in literary sources. The Oseberg ship burial in Norway, dating to the early 9th century, contained artifacts that many scholars associate with high-status Seidr practice, including an elaborately decorated wooden staff topped with metal ornaments and a collection of textile fragments that may have served as ritual coverings for magical implements. The burial's occupants, two women of obviously high social rank, were interred with grave goods that suggest both political authority and spiritual responsibilities that extended beyond conventional feminine roles within Viking Age society. The ship's inclusion in the burial created symbolic connections to travel between realms, a concept central to Seidr practice and its emphasis on consciousness journeys through spiritual dimensions. Regional variations in Seidr practice reflected local adaptations of core techniques to address specific community needs and environmental conditions, with coastal practitioners emphasizing weather magic and maritime safety, while agricultural communities focused on fertility enhancement and seasonal timing. These adaptations created distinct regional traditions that maintained common theoretical foundations while developing specialized applications suited to local circumstances and cultural priorities. The diversity of Seidr practices across Scandinavia demonstrates both the technique's flexibility and its integration into various aspects of Norse society beyond simple religious observance. The relationship between Seidr practice and Freyja worship manifested through ritual sites where archaeological evidence suggests ceremonies that combined fertility magic with shamanic techniques, creating hybrid practices that address both agricultural productivity and spiritual communication needs. These sites typically featured distinctive arrangements of stones and post holes that may have supported temporary structures used during extended ritual activities, their positioning aligned with astronomical events that marked crucial points in agricultural and religious calendars. Votive deposits at these locations include objects associated with both fertility symbolism and magical practice, suggesting that practitioners viewed these domains as interconnected rather than separate areas of spiritual activity. The transmission of Seidr knowledge from Freyja to other practitioners created networks of magical instruction that extended beyond Asgard to encompass mortal communities whose members sought access to prophetic abilities and spiritual communication techniques. These teaching relationships required careful selection of students based on their psychological stability, spiritual sensitivity, and commitment to the extensive training periods necessary for developing reliable magical capabilities. The instruction process typically involved apprenticeships lasting several years, with students gradually assuming greater responsibilities as their skills developed, while remaining under their teacher's guidance until they achieved independent practitioner status. The integration of Seidr techniques into broader Norse magical traditions created synergistic combinations that enhanced the effectiveness of both shamanic practices and conventional runic magic, with skilled practitioners learning to coordinate different magical systems to achieve results that exceeded what either approach could accomplish independently. These hybrid techniques required deep understanding of both theoretical frameworks and their practical applications, knowledge that few individuals possessed in sufficient depth to avoid dangerous interactions between incompatible magical energies. The successful combination of Seidr and runic magic represented the pinnacle of Norse magical achievement, creating capabilities that approached divine levels of power and cosmic influence. The social implications of widespread Seidr practice extended beyond individual magical capabilities to encompass changes in community decision-making processes and social hierarchies that accommodated the authority of practitioners who possessed access to prophetic knowledge and spiritual communication abilities. Communities that included skilled Seidr practitioners often developed consultation procedures that incorporated magical insights into political and economic planning, creating hybrid governance systems that balance conventional leadership with supernatural guidance. These arrangements required careful management to prevent conflicts between secular and spiritual authorities while ensuring that magical advice received appropriate consideration in community decision-making processes. The decline of Seidr practice during the Christian conversion period reflected both active suppression by religious authorities who viewed shamanic techniques as demonic and natural attrition, as traditional knowledge transmission systems became disrupted by cultural changes. The practice's association with feminine spiritual authority made it particularly vulnerable to Christian gender role expectations that restricted women's religious activities while emphasizing male clerical authority. However, elements of Seidr technique survived in folk magical traditions that adapted shamanic principles to Christian theological frameworks, creating hybrid practices that maintained essential functions while avoiding direct confrontation with ecclesiastical authorities. Modern archaeological investigations continue revealing evidence for the historical reality of Seidr practice and its connections to Freyja worship, with new discoveries providing insights into the actual implementation of techniques that literary sources describe in mythological contexts. These findings suggest that the magical practices attributed to Freyja in Norse literature reflected genuine shamanic traditions that played significant roles in Scandinavian religious and social life. their influence extending far beyond simple superstition to encompass sophisticated spiritual technologies that addressed fundamental human needs for guidance, healing, and connection with supernatural forces. The prophetic accounts of Ragnarok, the twilight of the gods, present a striking anomaly in their treatment of Freyja compared to other major deities within the Norse pantheon. The Völuspá, the most comprehensive source for understanding the cosmic destruction and renewal cycle, devotes extensive passages to describing the fates of Odin, Thor, Freyja, and numerous other divine figures. Yet Freyja appears only in fleeting references that provide no clear indication of her role during the final battle or her ultimate destiny. This absence becomes particularly notable when considering her established importance within Asgard's hierarchy and her significant contributions to divine society through her magical expertise, fertility, dominion, and political influence. The seeress who delivers the Völuspá prophecy describes in vivid detail how Odin will face the wolf Fenrir in combat, their mutual destruction marking one of the most significant casualties of the final battle. Thor's confrontation with the Midgard serpent receives similarly detailed treatment, with the prophecy specifying that while the thunder god will succeed in slaying Jormungandr, he will succumb to the creature's venom after taking only 9 steps from their battlefield encounter. These specific descriptions establish clear narrative arcs for major male deities, while leaving Freyja's participation and fate shrouded in uncertainty that has puzzled scholars for generations. The Prose Edda's account of Ragnarok, compiled by Snorri Sturluson in the 13th century, similarly emphasises the destinies of male deities while providing minimal information about female divine figures beyond brief mentions of their relationships to the primary combatants. Snorri's description focuses heavily on the military aspects of the final conflict, detailing troop movements, battle formations, and individual combat encounters that determine the outcome of specific engagements. This martial emphasis may partially explain Freyja's reduced presence, as her domains of fertility, love, and Seidr magic might have seemed less relevant to the apocalyptic warfare that dominates traditional Ragnarok narratives. However, the systematic exclusion of Freyja from detailed Ragnarok accounts cannot be attributed solely to gender bias or martial focus, as other female figures receive more substantial treatment in various sources. The Volva who prophesies the world's destruction and renewal occupies a central narrative position, her voice providing the primary perspective through which audiences experience the cosmic transformation. Frigg's grief over Baldur's death and her attempts to prevent the tragedy that precipitates Ragnarok receive considerable attention in related mythological accounts. The selective nature of Freyja's absence suggests deliberate editorial choices rather than simple oversight or cultural prejudice. Archaeological evidence from the late Viking Age reveals continued veneration of Freyja through the period when Ragnarok narratives were being formalized in literary sources, indicating that her worship remained active and significant within Scandinavian religious practices. Excavations at sites associated with her cult have uncovered votive deposits dating to the 10th and 11th centuries, including elaborate jewellery, fertility symbols, and ritual implements that demonstrate ongoing devotional activities. These findings suggest that her absence from Ragnarok prophecies reflects specific literary or theological decisions, rather than declining religious importance during the period when these texts were composed. The possibility that Freyja's limited presence in Ragnarok accounts results from her association with renewal and regeneration creates intriguing interpretative opportunities that align with broader patterns in Norse cosmological thinking. The mythological cycle emphasizes destruction as a prerequisite for cosmic renewal, with the old world's annihilation enabling the emergence of a purified reality populated by surviving deities and reborn humanity. Freyja's fundamental connection to fertility and life-generating forces might position her as a figure whose primary significance emerges after the destructive phase concludes, making her less relevant to narratives focused on the battle itself rather than its aftermath. This interpretation gained support from comparative analysis of other Indo-European mythological traditions that feature apocalyptic cycles, followed by cosmic renewal, where fertility deities often play crucial roles in the regeneration process while remaining relatively absent from destruction narratives. The Hindu concept of cosmic cycles includes periods of dissolution followed by recreation, with fertility and prosperity deities assuming prominence during renewal phases, while warrior gods dominate destruction periods. Similar patterns appear in Celtic mythology, where goddesses associated with land fertility and sovereignty often survive catastrophic events that eliminate male warrior deities, their persistence enabling the restoration of civilization and natural abundance. The scholarly debate surrounding Freyja's Ragnarok fate has generated numerous theories attempting to explain the source material's ambiguity, while providing coherent interpretations of her likely destiny. Some researchers argue that her survival represents an inevitable consequence of her essential nature, as fertility and regeneration cannot be permanently destroyed without eliminating the possibility of cosmic renewal. This perspective suggests that while specific manifestations of fertility might perish during Ragnarok, the fundamental principles that Freyja embodies must persist to enable the new world's emergence from the ashes of the old. Alternative interpretations propose that Freyja's absence from detailed Ragnarok accounts reflects her successful avoidance of the conflicts that destroy other deities, her wisdom and magical abilities enabling her to recognize the approaching catastrophe and take protective measures that ensure her survival. This theory emphasizes her prophetic capabilities through Seidr magic, suggesting that her foresight would naturally lead to preparation strategies that other deities, focused on honor and martial glory, might reject as cowardly or inappropriate. Her survival would then result from practical wisdom, rather than essential immortality, demonstrating the advantages of magical knowledge over conventional divine power. The possibility that Freyja transforms or transcends her current form during Ragnarok, rather than simply surviving or perishing, creates additional interpretative possibilities that align with her established shape-shifting abilities and her mastery of consciousness manipulation through Seidr practice. Norse mythology includes numerous examples of beings who undergo fundamental transformations that preserve their essential nature while changing their external manifestation, suggesting that death and survival represent overly simplistic categories for understanding divine destiny during cosmic transitions. Freyja's magical expertise might enable her to achieve states of existence that transcend conventional mortality while maintaining her core identity and capabilities. The limited references to Freyja in Ragnarok sources occasionally provide tantalizing hints about her potential involvement in events surrounding the final battle, though these passages typically require extensive interpretation to yield meaningful insights about her specific role or ultimate fate. The Völuspá mentions golden tears falling from the sky during the cosmic destruction, imagery that some scholars connect to Freyja's famous weeping of golden tears during her searches for her missing husband Odin. This interpretation suggests that her emotional response to the universal catastrophe manifests through supernatural phenomena that affect the physical environment, her grief contributing to the atmospheric disturbances that accompany the world's dissolution. References to fertility returning to the renewed earth after Ragnarok's conclusion create implicit connections to Freyja's survival and continued influence, as the restoration of agricultural abundance and human reproduction would naturally fall within her domain of authority. The prophecy describes green fields emerging from the waters that cover the destroyed world, their spontaneous fertility enabling the survival of hidden human populations who will repopulate the cleansed earth. This imagery strongly suggests the presence of divine forces associated with fertility and regeneration, though the sources avoid explicitly naming Freyja as the source of these beneficial influences. The survival of certain divine artifacts through Ragnarok creates additional possibilities for Freyja's continued existence or influence in the post-apocalyptic world, as objects imbued with her essence might preserve aspects of her power even if her physical form perishes during the cosmic destruction. Brisingamen's extraordinary magical properties and its deep connection to her divine identity suggest that the necklace might endure the universal catastrophe, its presence in the renewed world providing foundations for the restoration of fertility magic and the practices associated with her worship. Archaeological parallels exist in the survival of religious artifacts through periods of cultural destruction and renewal, with sacred objects serving as focal points for the revival of traditional practices after extended periods of suppression or abandonment. The question of whether Freyja's Hall Sessrumnir survives Ragnarok, or requires reconstruction in the renewed world, carries significant implications for understanding the continuity between pre- and post-apocalyptic divine society. The Hall's function as a destination for fallen warriors creates obvious relevance to Ragnarok's massive casualties, as the battle's survivors would need facilities for honouring the dead while establishing new social structures appropriate to the transformed cosmic environment. Sessrumnir's survival might indicate Freyja's continued presence and authority, while its destruction could suggest either her death or her transformation into forms that no longer require physical dwelling places. The relationship between Freyja's fate and that of her brother Freyja presents another avenue for scholarly speculation, as their parallel positions within the Vanir pantheon and their complementary domains of fertility and prosperity suggest that their destinies during Ragnarok might follow similar patterns. The Völuspá explicitly describes Freyja's death during his combat with Surtur, the fire giant whose flaming sword ultimately destroys the old world through universal conflagration. This detailed account of Freyja's demise contrasts sharply with the silence surrounding Freyja's fate, creating questions about whether their parallel status extends to shared destruction or whether fundamental differences in their roles create different survival prospects. The possibility that Freyja's absence from detailed Ragnarok accounts reflects later Christian influence on the preservation and transmission of Norse mythological material creates additional layers of interpretative complexity that scholars must navigate when attempting to reconstruct original pagan beliefs about her ultimate destiny. Christian scribes who recorded and preserved Norse mythological traditions often modified content that conflicted with their religious beliefs, particularly material involving female divine figures whose powers and behaviours challenged Christian assumptions about appropriate feminine roles and spiritual authority. Freyja's association with sexuality, magic, and independent divine authority might have made her particularly vulnerable to editorial suppression or modification. A comparative analysis of Freyja's treatment in different source materials reveals inconsistencies that suggest varying levels of Christian influence or different regional traditions that preserved alternative versions of her mythological significance. Sources that emphasize her magical abilities and her role in divine politics tend to provide more substantial treatment of her character and activities, while texts focused on eschatological themes often minimize her presence in favor of male warrior deities whose actions align more closely with Christian concepts of divine judgment and cosmic justice. These variations complicate attempts to establish definitive conclusions about original pagan beliefs regarding her Ragnarok fate. Modern scholarly approaches to the Freyja Ragnarok problem increasingly emphasize the importance of recognizing the limitations of surviving source material, while avoiding overconfident interpretations that exceed what the evidence can reasonably support. The gaps in mythological accounts might reflect genuine uncertainties within original Norse religious traditions, rather than simple textual corruption or editorial bias, suggesting that ancient practitioners themselves may have held diverse opinions about divine destinies during cosmic transformation. This perspective encourages interpretative humility, while acknowledging the legitimate scholarly interest in understanding how fertility and regeneration principles might function within apocalyptic and renewal frameworks. The ongoing archaeological discoveries that continue expanding understanding of Norse religious practices provide hope for future insights into Freyja's mythological significance and her potential role in Ragnarok narratives, though material evidence rarely addresses specific theological questions about divine destinies during cosmic transitions. Recent excavations have revealed previously unknown aspects of her worship, including ritual sites that demonstrate her continued veneration through periods of religious transition and cultural change. These findings suggest that her religious significance persisted despite her limited presence in literary sources, indicating that written accounts may not fully represent the breadth and depth of her mythological importance within Norse spiritual traditions. The archaeological record across Scandinavia reveals extensive evidence for Freyja's worship, spanning over a millennium, from the migration period through the late Viking Age and into the early medieval period. Excavations at Gamla Uppsala in Sweden have uncovered ritual deposits containing miniature golden boars, amber beads carved in feminine forms, and silver arm rings inscribed with runic invocations to Freyju, dating from the 6th to 11th centuries. The stratified layers at this crucial religious centre demonstrate continuous veneration despite changing political circumstances and the gradual introduction of Christianity. Archaeologists have identified distinct phases of ritual activity, with earlier deposits emphasizing fertility symbols and later materials incorporating defensive magical elements that suggest her worship adapted to address new threats and challenges. The distribution of place names incorporating Freyja's various epithets provides compelling evidence for the geographical extent of her cult across the Nordic world. Norwegian locations such as Frøyland, Frøystad and Frøyhov preserve her name in forms indicating active worship communities that constructed temples and conducted regular ceremonies in her honour. Swedish toponyms including Frölunda, Fortuna and Frøjel demonstrate similar patterns of religious dedication, while Danish sites like Froslev and Frørup indicate that her veneration extended throughout the Scandinavian peninsula. These place names often correlate with archaeological discoveries of votive deposits, ritual implements, and architectural remains that confirm the historical reality of organised religious activities centred on her worship. The island of Frösn in central Sweden represents perhaps the most significant archaeological site associated with Freyja worship, its name literally meaning Freyja's island, but containing substantial evidence for parallel veneration of his sister. Excavations have revealed a complex of buildings dating to the 10th and 11th centuries that appear to have served religious functions, including a large hall structure with distinctive architectural features that match descriptions of pagan temples in contemporary sources. The site has yielded numerous artefacts associated with fertility magic, including carved wooden phalluses, bronze figurines depicting pregnant women, and collections of amber beads that may have served as offerings or ritual implements. Specialised burial practices across Scandinavia provide additional evidence for the historical reality of Seidr practitioners who served as Freyja's priestesses and maintained her cult traditions. The Firkat cemetery in Denmark contains several graves of women buried with distinctive staffs topped with iron rings, collections of unusual stones and crystals, and evidence of ritual treatment that differs markedly from standard burial customs. These graves typically include high-status grave goods such as imported textiles, elaborate jewellery, and exotic materials that indicate the deceased held positions of considerable social authority within their communities. The staffs themselves match literary descriptions of Seidr implements, their construction incorporating materials from multiple realms and featuring decorative elements that suggest both practical and symbolic functions. The Oseberg ship burial provides the most spectacular example of high-status female burial practices that may reflect Freyja worship traditions. The two women interred in this elaborate 9th century grave were accompanied by artefacts that suggest both political authority and spiritual responsibilities, including what appears to be a cedar staff decorated with intricate metalwork and a collection of textile fragments that may have served as ritual coverings. The ship itself creates symbolic connections to travel between realms, a concept central to both Freyja's mythology and the shamanic practices associated with her worship. Recent analysis of organic materials from the burial has revealed traces of cannabis and other psychoactive substances that may have been used in religious ceremonies involving altered states of consciousness. Regional variations in artifact types and burial practices reveal how different communities adapted Freyja worship to local needs and cultural traditions while maintaining core theological elements. Coastal settlements emphasized her maritime connections through votive deposits of ship models, fishing equipment, and marine-themed jewellery found in sacred groves and spring sites. Agricultural communities focused on fertility aspects through ritual ploughing ceremonies that left distinctive soil disturbances containing offerings of grain, miniature farming tools, and carved representations of pregnant animals. Trading centres highlighted her association with wealth through hoards of precious metals, imported luxury goods, and specialised scales and weights that may have been blessed for use in commercial transactions. The transformation of Freyja from active goddess to folk figure during the Christian conversion period demonstrates the remarkable persistence of her mythological influence despite official religious oppression. Medieval Scandinavian folklore preserved many of her characteristics through fairy tale figures who retained her associations with beauty, magic, and mysterious disappearances. The Norwegian tradition of the Huldra, a beautiful forest spirit who could appear as either helpful or dangerous depending on how mortals treated her, clearly derives from Freyja's dual nature as both benevolent fertility goddess and potentially destructive supernatural force. These folk figures maintained her connection to shape-shifting abilities, often appearing as beautiful women who could transform into animals or vanish entirely when their true nature was discovered. Swedish folklore developed the concept of the Skogsra or forest ruler, a female spirit who governed woodland fertility and the fate of hunters and gatherers who entered her domain. Like Freyja, the Skogsra possessed extraordinary beauty that could enchant mortal men while wielding magical powers that controlled the abundance or scarcity of forest resources. The spirit's dwelling was typically described as a magnificent hall, hidden within the deepest parts of the forest, accessible only to those who possessed special knowledge or had earned her favour through appropriate offerings and respectful behaviour. These descriptions clearly echo mythological accounts of Sessrumnir and its role as a destination for chosen heroes. Danish traditions preserved Freyja's characteristics through stories of the Elvekong, or Elf Queen, a powerful supernatural being who ruled over fertility spirits and commanded the magical forces that governed agricultural prosperity. The Elf Queen possessed a magnificent necklace that enhanced her beauty and magical abilities, an obvious reference to Brisingamen that demonstrates the persistence of specific mythological details through centuries of cultural transmission. Folktales described her periodic appearances at harvest festivals and midsummer celebrations, where she would bless the crops and ensure continued prosperity for communities that maintained proper ritual observances. The preservation of Seidr-related practices in folk magic traditions reveals how Freyja's shamanic associations survived Christian suppression through adaptation to new theological frameworks. Medieval grimoires and magical handbooks from Iceland and Norway contain spells and procedures that clearly derive from earlier Seidr techniques, though they have been modified to invoke Christian saints and biblical figures rather than pagan deities. These texts describe methods for inducing prophetic visions, communicating with spirits, and manipulating fate that closely parallel literary accounts of Freyja's magical practices. The persistence of these techniques suggests that her shamanic traditions remained sufficiently valuable to merit preservation, despite the risks associated with practicing non-Christian magic. The modern revival of Norse paganism through Asatru and heathenry movements has created new contexts for understanding and practicing Freyja worship. though contemporary interpretations often differ significantly from historical reconstructions based on archaeological and literary evidence. Modern practitioners typically emphasize her role as a goddess of feminine empowerment and sexual liberation, aspects that resonate with contemporary values while potentially overlooking the more complex political and magical dimensions of her historical worship. These movements have generated substantial scholarly interest in Norse religious practices, while creating communities dedicated to preserving and revitalizing traditional spiritual techniques. Contemporary Asatru groups have developed elaborate ritual frameworks for honoring Freyja that combine reconstructed historical practices with modern innovations designed to address current spiritual needs and social circumstances. These ceremonies typically include offerings of precious metals, flowers, and handcrafted items that reflect her associations with beauty and prosperity, while incorporating elements of feminist spirituality that emphasize her role as a patron of women's independence and sexual autonomy. The rituals often feature group Seidr sessions that attempt to recreate the shamanic practices described in medieval sources, though modern practitioners acknowledge the substantial gaps in available knowledge about specific techniques and procedures. The academic study of Norse religion has benefited significantly from the increased interest generated by modern pagan movements, with scholars and practitioners collaborating to develop more nuanced understandings of historical worship practices and their contemporary relevance. Archaeological investigations at sites associated with Freyja worship have intensified in recent decades, yielding new discoveries that expand knowledge of ritual activities and religious architecture, while providing insights into the social and economic contexts that supported her cult. These collaborative efforts have produced more sophisticated interpretations of artifact assemblages and site layouts that recognize the complexity of Norse religious practices rather than reducing them to simple fertility worship or warrior cult activities. The influence of Freyja on European literature extends far beyond medieval Scandinavian sources to encompass works by major authors who drew inspiration from Norse mythology for their creative projects. Richard Wagner's Ring Cycle incorporates elements from her mythology through the character of Freyja, though Wagner's interpretation emphasizes her role as a symbol of natural beauty and innocence, rather than the more complex magical and political dimensions evident in original sources. The opera's portrayal established patterns for subsequent artistic treatments that often simplified her character to focus on romantic and aesthetic themes, while overlooking her shamanic abilities and independent authority. The scholarly assessment of Freyja's historical significance continues evolving as new archaeological discoveries and analytical techniques provide fresh insights into Norse religious practices and their social contexts. Recent excavations at sites across Scandinavia have revealed evidence for more sophisticated and widespread religious activities than previously recognized, suggesting that her worship played crucial roles in community organization and cultural identity formation throughout the Viking Age. These findings challenge earlier interpretations that viewed Norse paganism as primarily focused on warrior culture and male deities, revealing instead a complex religious system that incorporated diverse spiritual traditions and served multiple social functions. The persistence of Freyja's mythological influence across more than a millennium of cultural change demonstrates the enduring appeal of her complex character and the fundamental human concerns that her worship addressed. Her domains of fertility, love, magic, and death encompass experiences that remain central to human existence, regardless of technological advancement or social transformation. The continued scholarly and popular interest in her mythology reflects both historical curiosity and contemporary relevance, as modern audiences find in her stories themes and values that resonate with current concerns about gender equality, spiritual empowerment, and the relationship between individual desire and social responsibility. Archaeological investigations continue revealing new aspects of her historical worship, while literary analysis provides deeper understanding of how her mythology functioned within Norse cultural frameworks. The combination of material evidence and textual sources creates increasingly sophisticated reconstructions of religious practices that acknowledge both the diversity of regional traditions and the underlying theological principles that unified her worship across Scandinavian communities. These scholarly developments ensure that future generations will possess more complete and accurate understandings of her significance within Norse religious traditions and her continuing influence on contemporary spiritual and cultural expressions. The legacy of Freyja extends from prehistoric fertility cults through medieval literary preservation to modern spiritual revival and popular culture representation, creating an unbroken chain of cultural transmission that demonstrates the remarkable persistence of mythological traditions across centuries of social and religious change. Her transformation from active goddess to folklore figure to modern cultural icon illustrates how mythological characters adapt to changing cultural contexts while maintaining essential characteristics that continue addressing fundamental human needs and concerns. This adaptability ensures that her influence will persist as future generations discover new ways to interpret and apply her mythology to their own spiritual and cultural circumstances, maintaining her position as one of the most enduring and significant figures in the Norse pantheon.